Okay, I'm calling to order the meeting for the City of Salem Budget Committee for May 6th, 2020. Before the recorder calls the roll, I would like to take a moment to introduce two new committee members, April Davis from Ward 3. Hi, April, and Diane DeCarmo, our member at large. Welcome to the Budget Committee, and thank you for your interest in participating. Now, can the recorder please call the roll?
Yes. Member Bennett?
Here.
Member Kaiser?
Present.
Member Tom Anderson?
Present.
Member Nanke?
Here.
Member Leong?
Here.
Member Osick?
Here.
Member Hoy?
Here.
Member Nordike?
Here.
Member Lewis? Absent. Member DeCarmo?
Here.
Member Tigan?
Here.
Member Sharrock?
Here.
Member Davis?
Here.
Member McCoy?
Here.
Member William Anderson?
Here.
Member Sund?
Here.
Member Milton?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, well, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the governor's executive orders, no oral testimony, public comment will be available tonight, but the public is encouraged to submit written testimony to the Budget Committee. And as provided by Budget Officer Josh Eggleston, you have public testimony in your files today. Let's move to the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes from the January 15th, 2020 meeting?
So moved.
I have a
Second.
motion from Member Anderson and the second from Member Anderson, William Anderson.
We stick together.
Thank you for aptly confusing me. It's good. Is there any discussion? Okay, since this meeting is virtual and we practiced this at the start of the roll call, all votes are going to be done by roll call. The recorder will call your name, unmute yourself, and if in favor, please signify by saying aye. If opposed, please signify by saying no. Will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote for the approval of the January 15th, 2020 meeting minutes?
Member Bennett?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Nanke?
Aye.
Member Leong?
Aye.
Member Osick?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordike?
Aye.
Member Lewis? Member DeCarmo?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Sharrock?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member McCoy?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
Member Milton?
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion passes. Thank you. I would like to ask Budget Officer Eggleston to review tonight's action items.
Thank you, Chair Tigan. Good evening, Budget Committee members. I'm Josh Eggleston, the city's budget officer. Tonight we have 3 action items. The first is a temporary amendment to the Budget Committee procedures regarding public comment. This amendment is consistent with the executive orders that the governor has issued.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve the temporary amendment to Budget Committee Rules of Procedure as recommended by staff? I have a motion from member Hoy and a second from member Anderson. Tom?
Nanki.
Nanki, excuse me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nanki. Is there any discussion about this motion? Okay, seeing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennett,
Aye.
Member Kaiser,
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson,
Aye.
Member Nanki,
Aye.
Member Leong,
Aye.
Member Hoy,
Maybe Osick?
Aye.
yes, and thank you for both. Member Nordyke,
Aye.
Member Lewis, Member DeCarmo,
Aye.
Member Tigan,
Aye.
Member Shrock,
Aye.
Member Davis,
Aye.
Member McCoy,
Aye.
Member William Anderson,
Aye.
Member Sund,
Aye.
Member Milton.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. Let's take a moment. Can we get member Lewis to do a sound check? Still a little quiet for us.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. That's it for me.
Okay. Thank you, member Lewis. Budget Officer Eggleston, would you introduce the errata one?
Of course. Thank you, Chair. An errata is used to identify incorrect errors or provide new information. Small errors or typos will be corrected with the adopted budget publication. But if the error has a budgetary impact or could affect comprehension, an errata sheet is prepared. In this case, the capital improvement expenditure summary was missing a number for park system development charges, which could affect comprehension. And this errata is also updating the capital improvement plan and the capital improvement budget for an additional $1.8 million for the ozone treatment facility at Guerin Island. The amount is moved to the ozone project from the water unspecified project. And this is just because we got the guaranteed maximum price and needed an adjustment.
Okay, thank you, Budget Officer Eggleston. May I have a motion to approve errata sheet 1 as recommended by staff? I'll go with, I have a motion from member Tom Anderson and a second from member Lewis. Is there any discussion on errata sheet 1? Okay, hearing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennett,
Aye.
Member Kaiser,
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson,
Aye.
Member Nanki,
Aye.
Member Leong,
Aye.
Member Osick,
Aye.
Member Hoy,
Aye.
Member Nordyke,
Aye.
Member Lewis,
Aye.
Member DeCarmo,
Aye.
Member Tigan,
Aye.
Member Shrock,
Aye.
Member Davis,
Aye.
Member McCoy,
Aye.
Member William Anderson,
Aye.
Member Sund,
Aye.
Member Milton.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. Budget Officer Eggleston, could you please review the information items and handouts this evening?
We actually have one more errata that we need to approve on the additions agenda.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
It was even highlighted in purple for me to really take note of it, and I just went right past it. Okay, can you please give us a description of errata sheet 2 as necessary?
Errata 2 corrects a workforce change table on page 15 and adjusts the FTE count for facility services. 4 of the proposed facility positions are budgeted at 10 months, and the FTE count reflected that 10-month FTE count. So in order to reflect full-time positions, it required a correction. and this impacts several pages in the budget book, and they're identified on the errata sheet too.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion to approve errata sheet 2 as recommended by the staff?
Motion. Approved.
I have a motion from member Milton, thank you, and a second from member Kaiser. Is there any discussion about errata sheet 2? Okay, seeing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennett,
Aye.
Member Kaiser,
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson,
Aye.
Member Nanke,
Aye.
Member Leong,
Aye.
Member Osick,
Aye.
Member Hoy,
Aye.
Member Nordyke,
Sorry, aye.
Member Lewis. Oh, sorry, Member Lewis.
Aye.
Member DeCarmo,
Aye.
Member Tigan,
Aye.
Member Shirok, I think you're muted, Member Shirok.
Aye.
Thank you. Member Davis,
Aye.
Member McCoy,
Aye.
Member William Anderson,
Aye.
Member Sund,
Aye.
and Member Milton.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. Okay, now, Budget Officer Eggleston, are you ready to review the information items and handouts for this evening?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. For information items, you have the 2 proposed budget books provided in advance of the meeting. Hopefully you all received those at your houses. The capital improvement plan also, the budget committee procedures. I'm not sure if we actually sent those out, but they are available on the city's webpage under the budget committee meeting or the budget committee member section. Also is a memo on a proposed increase for planning division fees, and then a response to Mr. Easterly's testimony to the budget committee also. And then under section 2, there's quite a number of public testimony items that have been received. And I'd just like to note that the reference for 2H, the $1,400 that's referenced for the program, is included in the budget. And that's all your information items for tonight.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for addressing the point in 2H.
It looks like the mayor has a question.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Josh, I just wanted to understand then what Annie Batiste sent us a testimony about is actually resolved in the budget to her description.
Yes, that's correct. It is
Okay, thank you.
in the proposed budget.
Any other questions for the budget officer, Member Lewis?
Hear me. Thank you for unmuting me. I have a question on agenda item 2D. I'm concerned that the council is being accused of a level of not paying attention enough that I believe that this letter deserves an official answer. And I don't know whether that should come from the budget officer or whether it should come from the legal counsel, but to just accept it as information and not address it publicly is not acceptable to me.
Just 1 second, let me find that item. And I believe that's in reference to downtown parking. So perhaps the city manager or Christian might have a response for that.
No, actually, excuse me, but it's nothing to do with downtown parking. It's to do with purchase of a property in West Salem.
Yes, if I may, Chairperson, Councilor Lewis, we have responded to Mr. Easterly.
I apologize. I thought you said 2B. So 2D is included in information items. Under 4E is a memo response for those items.
Okay, am I missing the response or has it not been disseminated to the budget committee,
So
or at least the city council.
It was sent around 4 o'clock to the entire budget committee as part of the additions agenda.
Okay.
So it's
That brings up another issue for me, but I'll wait to address that later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Member Lewis. Are we ready to move on to the city manager's presentation? Okay, Steve Powers, the city manager, will now deliver the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget and message.
Thank you, Chairperson Teigen. First, on behalf of the city staff, I really thank the budget committee members for your patience and for your understanding as we work through trying to make sure the public policy goals of citizen engagement and participation in developing a recommendation to council for the city's budget is met. It has been challenging. I applaud all of you on the sound check and the background check. Hopefully we'll have a few pets or children or spouses wander in through the evening to lighten the mood and bring some humor to tonight's meeting. We are continuing to refine our virtual meeting process. We are practicing with City Council on Monday, May 11th, to provide real-time public participation, public comment, either by phone or virtually through the Zoom technology. And if we're successful, we'll have that in place for the Budget Committee's next meeting. I am pleased to present tonight to you the proposed City Manager's fiscal year 21 budget. As in past years, the budget is organized around 6 result areas. And we are, just give me one moment, one of the first technology challenges for the evening. And Josh will have to keep up with me as we go through the slides. And if we do get out of sync, please either alert Josh or I, and we'll get back in sync. Going on to the next slide, the budget message showing the result areas that demonstrate the city's priorities and resources assigned to them. This display shows the year-over-year change to the result area expenditure budgets. The fiscal year 2021 proposed budget represents a continuation of current city services with some slight enhancements that will be highlighted during the result area presentation later this evening. Budgeted city resources total a little over $748 million, representing a 6.6% increase from the current fiscal year. The expenditure budget totals $667.5 million, or a 5.3% increase from fiscal year 2020. This slide has quite a bit of information. I'll highlight some of it. The general fund is a continuing focus for us. This year represents a step towards sustainability with the implementation of the city operations fee. On the left is a comparison of the fiscal year 2020 general fund budget compared to the fiscal year 21 proposed budget. On the right is a comparison of the two forecasts, fiscal year 21 from January 2019 and January 2020, with a savings estimate for contingency and vacancy savings. As you can see, the January 2020 forecast and the FY 2021 proposed budget display a much more positive picture. This is mainly due to the implementation of the city operations fee and the work to align expenditures with the resources in the development of the fiscal year 2020 budget. While the result is much better in the general fund, the city is still anticipating a structural imbalance in the coming years. The general fund forecast on the screen maintains a positive fund balance throughout the forecast period, ending with a positive $6 million in fiscal year 2025. This reforecast was built using the adjustments to fiscal year 21 as a base and does not reflect any lasting impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. There is a continuing need for corrective action in the next few years to sustain the current level of services. The COVID-19 pandemic presents a unique challenge to develop and manage the fiscal year 2021 budget. Rather than trying to predict how the pandemic and its economic ripple effects will change the city's revenue and spending, I am sticking with a proposed budget that has been developed by the department director since January. I will recommend budget amendments to City Council as the effects become clear. We know there will be impacts to the revenues and expenditures being proposed, but the length and severity of the impacts at this time is unknown. The revenues listed on this slide are particularly sensitive to swings in the economy, and we'll go into detail as necessary later this evening or at your next meeting. Many of the services in the city budget remain unchanged. For example, the water usage has shifted somewhat from commercial to residential, but overall is comparable to prior years. I have left my budget presentation intentionally brief. We are asking you to cover an incredible amount of material tonight and at your next meeting, and if necessary on the 20th, your alternate meeting. I do though want to allow plenty of time for questions of the presentation that the budget officer will be giving, and I and all city staff that are part of this Zoom meeting stand ready to answer questions you might have regarding the proposed budget. So again, thank you for your service. Thank you for your patience as we work through providing that citizen opportunity, citizen input into the development of the city's budget for next year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Powers. Are there any questions from the committee for the city manager? And it'd be helpful for me, Josh, if we, there we go. I have a comically large screen that I'm looking at and hoping I can see hands. If you've got a question, try to put it into the field of view of your camera, and that would be helpful. Okay, Member McCoy.
I guess maybe this is more a comment than a question. I guess I'm troubled by the fact that given the severity where we're seeing in the economy with the COVID crisis, the absolute no knowledge of what's going to happen given the severity and the impact of the economy in the last month and a half. The fact that the governor looks like it's not going to open up anything much in Oregon until mid-May, if at all. And the fact that this is a citizen also included budget committee, and it's one of the citizens representing the city. I'm a little concerned, I guess, that basically it's business as usual as far as the budget committee goes. And if we need to do anything, we'll take care of it via the council only, which to me makes this sort of a, what are we doing here and what's the point of being here and going through this exercise? There's not going to be any citizen input into it because we're going to run through a normal budget as if everything was fine when it's not.
Member Tom Anderson.
Thank you. I have some of the concerns that Member McCoy has, and it's specifically, I at a later point in the meeting, I was going to ask this. We see from the home builders and the chamber and somebody else, I can't remember who, talked about the permit fees, planning permit fees, and whether or not with the current situation, if someone is hired, that there will actually be fees or work for that person to do. You know, that's a minor point compared to the larger point of Member McCoy, but you know, it seems like it's going to be pretty bad, and it's going to be worse than what we think it is. And you know, I don't know how big of a correction course we're going to have to make if it happens. And maybe there ought to be some sort of, I don't know if it's a plan B or something else that the city manager could present us at one of the next meetings, that if this happens, here's where we're going to have cuts, or here's what we anticipate if the city revenue stream is going to be pretty severely affected.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Bennett?
Thank you. Ms. Powers, I wondered if there is an amount of change, a size of change in revenue or in the requirements in the budget that actually prompts bringing the budget committee back together rather than having, no matter the size of the problem as it develops, being just resolved by the council, to kind of answer Member McCoy's concern about the role of the budget committee.
Yes, there certainly could be a threshold that would bring the budget committee back to provide guidance. We're not at this time anticipating significant changes to most of our revenues. We are not Portland. We are not one of the coastal communities. We don't rely on revenues that have already been impacted by the economic devastation caused by the COVID-19 virus. We rely on property tax. We do not expect that to be significantly reduced in the coming fiscal year. The impact would likely be, if there is a significant impact, would likely be in fiscal year 2022. But certainly, if as we go through the budget over this evening and next, at the conclusion, there could certainly be a threshold established where the budget committee would be reconvened to help guide City Council on an amended fiscal year 2021 budget.
Member Bennett?
One thought then, Mr. Manager, would be to maybe think about what that threshold would look like as we work our way through this. If you have a recommendation toward the end, if after we reviewed the budget, folks, you know, still feel like we ought to at least talk about it, if not do it, what would you recommend as the size of problem that would really prompt that level of involvement from the budget committee? I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Davis.
I just wanted to mention that, so he's saying that our revenues aren't going to change a whole lot, probably, but what should change is our focus. I mean, that's why we're here. As a citizen on this committee, I'm really happy to be here at this time. He's going to be hurting right now. So that's going to be our job now. If revenue's not changing, great. But when we're going through this proposed budget, I think we all should be mindful of our focus.
Thank you, Member Davis. Member Milton?
I know we're talking about the COVID at this point, but are we looking at the impact of 2008 to see if that's going to have any mirror to what we're doing now and going forward?
I'm going to ask that City Manager Powers answer the questions. We'll try to keep it with Manager Powers at this moment.
The question being whether the COVID-19 pandemic will have the same economic consequences as the Great Recession?
in 2008.
Yeah, one of the challenges in presenting this budget, the timing of the proposed budget, is what changes, if any, do we make based upon what might happen? And the approach that we've taken is to make adjustments that can be objectively verified. My answer to your question would be as, I think, speculative as the economists and the forecasters are providing already. Perhaps our chief financial officer or our budget officer can provide their opinion. My opinion is we need to be prudent going forward and again, adjust as we know what the actual impacts are going to be, or we can forecast what the actual impacts are going to be.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Powers. I guess just from the chair, I'll remind folks that we have 6 areas to go through tonight, the capital improvement plan as well, and then sometime at the end of the evening for deliberations. So if we have additional questions for the city manager about his presentation, which was to the point, I think to move us into these service areas, I think let's entertain those now, and then if not, we can move into Mr. Eggleston's presentations. Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to the next agenda item on the topic for public hearings. The committee's first public hearing this evening is on the proposed uses of the state revenue sharing. The public hearing is now open. Does the budget office have a presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no formal presentation for the state revenue sharing public hearing. It is simply the first of 2 public hearings that the city is required to hold. Staff is recommending that the budget committee propose the city council that the state revenue sharing funds be used to offset the cost of police patrol in the general fund.
Okay, thank you. I will note that now we would normally have the time for oral public testimony, but due to temporary procedures, that will not be available. I do not believe we've received any public testimony regarding this public hearing. Therefore, the public hearing is now closed. Are there any questions or discussion from the Budget Committee about the state revenue sharing funds? Okay, seeing none, may I have a motion recommending the proposed uses of state revenue sharing to the City Council for adoption?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from member, I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
That was Nanki.
Oh, thank you, member Nanki. I have a motion from member Nanki and a second from member Bill Anderson. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Bennett?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Nanki?
Aye.
Member Leong?
Aye.
Member Osick?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Lewis? Sorry, Member Lewis, can you?
Aye.
Thank you. Member DeCarmo? Member DeCarmo?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Shrock?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member McCoyd?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
And Member Milton?
Aye, sorry, that's my mute button.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. All right, we'll move on to item 6B on our agenda this evening, the Capital Improvements Plan. The committee's second public hearing this evening is the city's fiscal year 2021 through fiscal year 2025 Capital Improvement Plan. My children are definitely wondering what is going on up here. The public hearing is now open. Does the budget office have a presentation?
Mr. Chair, I just want to declare a potential conflict of interest moving into this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Nordyke. Mr. Eggleston?
Yes, we do. Let me just share my screen. A capital improvement plan, or CIP, is a 5-year plan for capital spending. Like a budget, the CIP matches expected revenues with planned expenditures. But unlike a budget, the CIP has a multi-year timeline, which is helpful when planning large expenditures for projects that may span multiple years. Preparation of the CIP is governed by Council Policy C9. In addition, ORS Chapter 223 requires that projects financed by system development charges be part of an adopted financial plan. A CIP such as ours can be used to fulfill this requirement. CIP projects are identified in many ways, such as infrastructure assessments, planning processes, plan documents, and updates. For urban renewal, master plan updates and strategic action plans provide guidance and direction for included projects, as well as discussion at advisory board meetings. Overall, the assessment of current and future infrastructure needs and repairs are weighed against available financial resources. This larger group of identified issues are then evaluated for inclusion in the CIP. The CIP is noticed to the public in several ways, and often the projects that are included in the CIP are part of a master plan or other process that includes outreach to neighborhood associations or advisory boards. The CIP webpage includes information about the process and prior year CIP documents. It also includes a project request form for residents to submit projects to be considered for the CIP. In addition, the website contains information to help identify individual projects. The GIS team, which includes personnel from information technology and public works, have updated the interactive CIP project map to help give a visual representation of the projects by type and location. Users can click on the project icons and the project details will appear in a pop-up box. Each year, a public hearing is held to receive feedback on the plan. The public hearing is noticed through the weekly emailed Salem Community Connection, social media, and the city's website. The CIP is primarily a planning document and contains projects where likely funding sources have been identified, have a cost of $50,000 or more, and includes new projects or new funding sources. Projects that have been identified but do not have an identified source of funding remain outside of the CIP until those resources can be identified. Year 1 through 5 represent the plan period, but each individual project may have a different start year or project time span. As the process moves forward, the Year 1 CIP projects flow into the proposed budget. Previously funded and carryover projects contained in the current budget will also flow into the 2021 budget. The budget will then include all Year 1 projects, as well as carryover projects, projects adopted mid-year, reappropriations, administrative costs, and all smaller capital projects that did not hit the $50,000 or more threshold. The majority of the CIP document is made up of individual project details, like the example on this slide. They have the project number, the category of infrastructure, the neighborhood or neighborhoods, or if it's a system or something that might say citywide, the title of the project, the score if it's a scored project, the ward or wards, the funding source, and then if it has multiple funding sources, they'll all be listed. The total by year and the total for the 5 years. The amount funded in prior years, so if they were funded in 2020 or 2019 or prior. The total estimated project costs, including the prior year funding, and then a description of the project. For the actual CIP document, it represents over $282 million over that 5 years, 167 projects, 23 separate funding sources, and 11 separate categories of infrastructure. The chart on the screen highlights the funding sources, the largest being sources utility rates, followed by revenue bonds, the Urban Renewal Agency, and all other funding sources. This chart shows the CIP funding by the 4 major project groups. The utility makes up over half of the CIP, followed by transportation, and then portions for community and municipal facilities. There are a couple projects in the CIP this year that I would like to highlight. The first is the Public Works Operation Building that is proposed in the CIP with a total estimated cost of $24.6 million from fiscal year 2021 through fiscal year 2023. The building is the first in a phased approach that is consistent with the Shops Complex Master Plan. The building is funded entirely with utility rates. A few slides ago, we saw the project details for the ozone treatment facility. This project is the largest in the CIP this year and is funded with a combination of revenue bonds, utility rates, and a state grant. The ozone treatment facility was initiated to keep Salem's drinking water safe today and into the future. Ozone is an effective and safe method to treat water for toxic algae. The project is scheduled for completion in the spring of 2021. To look at the projects by category, you have community facilities, which is made up of historic structures and parks. Municipal facilities, that includes airport, buildings, information technology, and parking structures. Transportation, that has streets and streetlights. And then the largest with utilities, stormwater, wastewater, and water. This concludes the staff presentation for the proposed capital improvement plan. Representatives from city departments are available to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Budget Officer Eggleston. I will note again that now would normally be the time for oral public testimony, but due to the temporary procedures, that will not be available. I will say we've received a significant amount of public written testimony. I guess I'll say we've received some public testimony. Sorry, I'm just following along on here. And so now the public hearing is now closed. Are there any questions or discussions from the Budget Committee regarding the CIP? Mr. Member Tom Anderson, first to call.
This is more of a process question, and I must admit that other pressures have made it so I haven't been able to spend my usual perusal of the capital improvement plan, as opposed to this time I just scanned it. My question is, are we going to adopt it tonight or move to adopt it tonight, or will we do that at some later date and we're just having the hearing today? That's the staff question.
So tonight, the staff recommendation is to recommend the proposed capital improvement plan for consideration by the City Council. You could wait and do that at the next meeting if you wanted to continue the public hearing for deliberations only.
Well, I may be the only one, and if that's the case, I'm not going to slow things down. But if anybody else is interested in that, I would go along with it. But if it is just I who admits he hasn't read the whole thing, then I will trust the staff to go forward.
I would prefer that as well.
Thank you, Member William Anderson. Member Sund.
Yeah, I just recall last year when we got through some of the additional budget presentations, then there were things that were in the capital improvement plan that we wanted to revisit, yet we'd already recommended it. So I would be in favor of that, especially given that the capital improvement budget or plan uses a good portion of general fund money in the FY21 year.
Member Hoy.
Thank you. I concur with the continuing the public hearing for deliberations only to our next meeting. I think it's good to get the information out tonight, but I think it's also helpful to have time to digest it and consider it in context with the rest of the budget.
Chair Tigan, I move that we postpone adoption of the capital improvement plan until the next budget meeting.
A second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor from member Tom Anderson and a second by member William Anderson. From a process perspective, we can deliberate this motion, vote on it, and I suppose that'll suspend the public hearing until the next meeting. This is also the time in the meeting to discuss the details of the capital improvement plan with the staff. And so I don't want to close that opportunity, which is you are in it right now. So from a process perspective, we could vote on this motion. I guess I need a little bit of advice from staff as whether or not we can go back to quizzing and discussing it with staff in particular after that motion's been considered.
If I could, maybe I could offer a friendly amendment, or my understanding of my motion is we are going to close the public hearing, but postpone discussion, including questions of staff until the next meeting. If that's procedurally correct, then I would ask the manager or maybe the city attorneys online to let us know.
So Dan Atchison, city attorney. So essentially the motion is to postpone the deliberations and vote on the CIP. You're welcome to, if the motion passes, you're welcome to continue to question staff and talk to staff about it at this meeting as well as the next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Atchison. That was certainly a concern. If we don't have the conversations now, there would be very little opportunity for city staff to follow up to any questions that came up at the next meeting, as we're scheduled at this point to propose an adoption of the entire budget to the city council at the end of the next meeting. So I will go back to the motion on the floor to suspend this public hearing until the next meeting that was put forward by member Anderson and seconded by member William Anderson. If we take that vote or have discussion on it now, my understanding is we can go back after that vote is over and talk to the staff in the present. Is there any additional comment on that motion on the floor? Member Bennett.
I just wanted to understand. I didn't hear him. I didn't understand what suspend the public hearing means. I mean, you've closed the public hearing, or are going to, we're going to discuss and act on the CIP at the next meeting. That's how I understand.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I didn't say close the public hearing, that's what I meant. Close the public hearing and continue deliberations and questions till the next budget committee meeting. And I would add that if between now and the next budget committee meetings, the members of the budget committee have questions of staff, they could give them to staff then.
Well, the other thought I'd have is since it's clear folks didn't have time to read it, and that's understandable. This is a lot of material, but try to get your questions to staff in advance so we don't spend a whole bunch of time quizzing these guys at the next meeting, particularly if you get the answers you're looking for.
Yeah. No, that's what I meant, Mr. Mayor. I meant we could ask our questions before the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. We'll hear from member Hoy, then member Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had understood the motion to be that we were going to continue discussion tonight, but not actually vote until next meeting, which is what I would be in favor of. I did read the material, and I am prepared to ask questions tonight and have a conversation. I have one question about a specific project I'd like more information about. I don't want to put that off until next meeting, because then we're just doing next meeting what we should have done tonight and doing everything in one meeting. And that's not the point in my mind.
I think the city attorney has said that we can go ahead and have discussions after this motion, and then ask any other questions before. Those of us who haven't done our due diligence can then ask questions before the next meeting to get the answers we need.
Okay, thank you, member Anderson. Member Kaiser.
Thank you. I agree with member Hoy, because I have questions too for staff tonight. And I agree with some of the other comments. I think in the past, there's been this tendency to pass the CIP, and then there's questions that come up because you're looking at the rest of the budget, and then you have to amend the CIP later on. So I've always thought the CIP should be one of the last things that the budget committee approves. I guess I would make the recommendation to staff for the future that might be prudent to put these in a different order. But I agree with asking questions tonight, continuing for deliberations also next meeting.
Thank you, Member Kaiser. Member Sund.
So can we ask a question now, or do we need to vote on this?
Member Sund, I think we should take a vote on delaying the recommendation of the CIP plan to the City Council for adoption. We could take a vote on that motion as it stands on the floor now, and then we'll return to discussion with the city staff.
Okay.
Is there any further comment on the motion to delay the recommendation of the adoption of the CIP to the City Council?
Thank you.
Member Anderson.
The effect is to delay, but the motion is also to close the public hearing.
I believe that the motion was closed when I officially hit my gavel.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, seeing and hearing no other comment or question on the motion, will the recorder please call a vote?
Member Bennett?
Aye.
Member Kaiser?
Aye.
Member Tom Anderson?
Aye.
Member Nanke?
Aye.
Member Leong?
Aye.
Member Osick?
Aye.
Member Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Lewis?
Aye.
Okay, good. Member DeCarmo?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Shirok?
Aye.
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member McQuaid?
Aye.
Member William Anderson?
Aye.
Member Sund?
Aye.
And Member Milton?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. Knowing now that we will not vote on the recommendation to the City Council to adopt the CIP until the next meeting, I believe we now will go back to discussing the CIP with the staff. And I want to thank you for that Robert's Rules of Order challenge in my first Zoom meeting. I'll take a moment of privilege to tell you that a little bit of Oregon history. The gentleman who wrote Robert's Rules of Order actually oversaw the construction of the Yaquina Head Lighthouse just north of Newport, Oregon. And they shipped him off, and he wrote this book on a ship. So you can thank your lucky stars that you're an Oregonian. So let's move back into conversation about the CIP, and we'll start with Member Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the information on Yaquina Head Lighthouse, one of my favorite places in the whole state. So I have a question for the city manager regarding project number 992, which is the City Hall first floor reconfiguration. It's $958,000, and I would just like to hear more about what that entails, what departments are going to be moving, what the plan is, and what we're going to be getting for our $958,000 of general fund.
What page is that on, Council?
That is on page 31.
If I might clarify a couple things regarding that project and a few others in that same section. So that project, as well as a couple others at the Civic Center, are proposed to be funded with an internal loan from the utility fund. So that's part of that package. This City Hall first floor reconfiguration is kind of the initial funding for the police department moves out. There needs to be some funding in order to actually move things around to get people down there. It's set up for a police department right now, and that won't be the next use.
In the plan of specific departments, specific uses is still being developed. 2 or 3 strong potentials, or at least areas that we have a need. One, our municipal court is in space that's woefully inadequate. And also we have an opportunity with the police department moving out to move our high customer interaction, the physical, although we're learning as we go through the COVID-19 that service doesn't necessarily have to be in person, but for some services we do have a greater need for in-person interaction, and we'd be looking at relocating services to the ground floor that have that need to improve our customer service and avoid, or at least reduce the need for people to be wandering from floor to floor at the Civic Center. Those are the 2 most likely reuses of that space. And also the space itself needs work, as it's been occupied by the same department for over 30 years. And we have a need to reconfigure that space, I think, regardless of what department, what services may end up down there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I follow up with Mr. Eggleston?
Please.
Thank you. So, Josh, I heard you say that the bulk of this money is going to be a loan from the utility, and I'm just curious how much of this is actual general fund, how much of it's not, and if it's a loan from the utility, how are we paying that back? Are we paying that back with general fund dollars?
Yes, that's exactly right. So there's a debt service budgeted in the general fund, non-departmental, to pay back the utility fund. So we have a internal loan policy where we pay back at 0.5% over the local government investment pool amount. So that's how this first year is set. And it's the total is $3.76 million if you include all the projects that are planned for that borrowing.
Thank you. And so the 958, that is entirely from a loan, or is that a combination of other funds as well?
So that amount right there is entirely from a loan. Not knowing what the department makeup is down on that first floor, we're planning for as if it could be 100% general fund. It probably won't be. So there could be a combination of other funds paying for it directly, but we'll just have to wait and see how that turns out.
Thank you. And I have one other question regarding this kind of group of projects, if I could.
Please.
Thank you. This is project number 1041 on page 32, City Hall security installation. I'm curious if there's anything in that project regarding council chambers.
So that security installation is for physical security at the Civic Center. So it's near council chambers, but it's not actually council chambers. I have a few pictures later on in the presentations that actually show what that looks like, but it's basically a storefront underneath the Sky Bridge, and then also some security underneath to control the egress and ingress at City Hall.
Thank you.
Okay, Member Sund.
Yeah, on these projects at City Hall, which seem to be the largest use of the general fund, is there a reason that this year, other than the police facility coming online, is there a economic advantage to doing this work now, or versus, the wait, kind of putting it on hold and see how see kind of where we're at with the, throughout this fiscal year, given the pandemic, or is it kind of make sense to move forward with it?
So there's several different projects included. One of the larger ones for $1.5 billion is the transformer replacement for the whole Civic Center campus, including the library. With the library seismic project, it makes sense to do those 2 projects at the same time. They're actually going to be managing the project also, the same company. I believe, and I'm sure someone could speak to that if you'd like. The other one is the security upgrades with the police department leaving. There is a need for additional security, and what that looks like could change, but there's a need for something.
Okay, thank you. Member Kaiser.
Thank you. I also had a question about, excuse me, project 1042. This is the library elevator modernization and City Hall elevators. And I guess my question is, was the elevator replacement within the library not included in the bond that we currently have for renovations? Is this additional to that library bond money?
Yes, this is internal borrowing money, so it's not bond proceeds.
Okay, so the elevator replacement for the library was not an item in our project at all with the bond?
Not currently, no.
Okay. And then I had a question also about item 1086. This is the navigation center.
Page, counselor.
It's page 33.
Thank you.
And the navigation center, the question came up through the Downtown Advisory Board and through a letter they submitted to us about this. My question is the location of this property is not publicly available at this point. I would like somebody on staff to help me understand why it's not. I know we're going through a real estate transaction right now, but I think they bring up a good point. They're being asked to recommend $4 million to do this without knowing where. And I just think that help me understand so that they can also understand.
Thank you, Director Rutherford.
Yes, Kristen Rutherford, Urban Development Director. So this property acquisition has only been discussed in executive session. And because it was in executive session and not in a public forum yet, it's still confidential. So it would become public at the time that we come back to City Council in a public forum with a proposed purchase and sell agreement.
Okay, and I guess my question is if that property falls through potentially, what happens to this funding at that point?
Well, this funding is urban renewal funding, and so it would be predicated on whether or not there is another site that would be suitable within that urban renewal area. We haven't explored that at this time, and there's a particular site that meets needs. If that were to fall through, then we would be coming back to council to seek direction as to whether or not we wanted to look at other sites within the urban renewal area.
Okay, thank you.
Director Rutherford, if I may, can you describe what kind of public process will go on to engage the community as to whether the site that's been selected and you have a contract for, whether what part does the public play in deciding the location of the navigation center if you already have a contract?
To be clear, we do not have a contract yet. We've only had conversations about a specific location with council and executive session, and we have appraised a property and we've had discussions with the property owner, but we do not have a contract yet. In terms of the public process for siting a navigation center, the location of a navigation center is really going to have to be driven by operational needs and the proximity to other services and to those that would be managing the navigation center. So we don't anticipate that there would be a broader public process for the community to select where this would go. There are a number of other parameters in terms of building size, whether or not it can support that kind of operation, whether it meets zoning requirements, whether or not it meets life safety requirements. So there are a lot of constraints about where such a facility could be located.
Member Kaiser.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question. Could you explain or that this is a typical city process, right? When we're dealing with real estate, is that it's not public. It comes to council in an executive session until there is something that we can share publicly. Could you just help walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. When we do pursue property acquisition, that is a subject that can be discussed in confidential executive session with the city council. Real estate negotiations, because of pricing impacts and the nature of when you engage in a negotiation, when it becomes public, that can drive up pricing. So we generally will initiate it through a conversation with city council and then move forward with the negotiations. And then once we have settled on price and terms, then we will come back to city council in a public forum to get approval.
Thank you.
Member McCoy.
I guess I understand the process. I've been through it before in years past. I think what bothers me though is why are you asking this, downtown advisory board for their opinion if you're having basically they don't know where it is, but you're saying please approve what we're doing when they don't know where the site is, what's going on, what's the rationale, or anything about it, and it's money that they're supposed to be advising you and overseeing in the riverfront downtown area. It's sort of like, you know what I mean? Why they've got some recommendations that aren't even being considered or heard. It's to this point in this discussion that probably ought to be.
Not counselor anymore, committee member McCoy. I absolutely understand that concern, and that is something that we discussed at some length with the budget committee. I'm sorry, with the advisory board about their recommendation, and it is a difficult position from a staff perspective when you're having long-term strategic discussions with city council about property acquisition in an executive session, using funds that aren't under the control of another board, but are certainly under the advice and input from another body, and how to balance those two. Because we as staff are limited in what we can share with the advisory board when it has been discussed in executive session. And a project like this and an acquisition like this ties into the larger city strategy and beyond just the urban renewal plan, but it's meeting broader city goals. So their input is certainly considered, and when in the actual budget document that we bring forward to the budget committee, we're limited in the amount of information that we can share. And the historic practice has been that it is the staff or the city manager's recommendation that is brought forward to the budget committee. And in the past, the advisory board's recommendation has always been shared separately, either through an oral testimony or written testimony as their recommendation if it differs from what's moving forward through the city manager. So this doesn't differ from how this has been handled in the past, other than the fact that it's a much larger allocation. The difference is greater than it has been in the past, but the process is not different.
If I may follow up, I guess I have a question. I guess I have a couple questions about it. Was there discussion at the staff level about the appropriate fund to pay for this acquisition? At this point, it's coming out of the Urban Renewal Agency and would seem to be located in the downtown Urban Renewal Agency. Was there a discussion to find a different fund that could locate it somewhere else besides downtown, as those funds can only be spent within that urban renewal area? And I guess as a follow-up, if you, I'm not saying you have the location selected, you are interested in pursuing in this one place, what's the city's involvement in the future operation of that? What's the city obligating itself to by acquiring this parcel and with the vision of a navigation center? And to the budget committee, what's the funding mechanism for future operation of a navigation center like this?
Okay, well, you had a lot of questions there, so I'll try to recall them all and see if I can hit on all of them. The first one, in terms of why this location, and if we looked at other funds where we could locate this elsewhere in the city. This is driven by a couple of different factors. One is the location of partners and service providers that would be managing this kind of program and managing this kind of center. And that's where the capacity is and where the existing service providers are. So proximity towards those service providers and their operations is really important. And those service providers have chosen to locate in the downtown and are within the urban renewal area. So when we look at acquiring a facility that would meet operational needs and have proximity to a partner that could operate the facility, there are some geographical constraints. Unless there were going to be a much larger decision to partner in relocating an established service provider. So then when we start looking at the funds to pay for an acquisition like this, we are really limited to urban renewal or the general fund or various types of grants. And we are pursuing through state legislature grant funds that could be used for operations of this facility. And because of the capacity within the urban renewal area and then general fund capacity, the urban renewal area has greater capacity to fund this kind of acquisition with fewer negative impacts to the fund than if we were to purchase this using general fund. So did I get all of your questions?
Yeah, that was you're right. I stacked them on, which is not totally fair to you or the committee. Thank you for addressing the source of the funds to pay for the acquisition of a building for a navigation center. I sense that maybe Member Sund has a follow-up, and then Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, Director Rutherford, is it possible to, or maybe you already have responded to the Downtown Advisory Board's questions in a way that you can, obviously probably more general or not specifically related to the particular piece of property, but just because I think that and many probably would agree that their opinion is very important, but at the same time, we know where we stand and what the strategy is with the navigation center. So their questions were very good in their letter. I just wondered if that was a consideration.
Yeah, and we've certainly had those conversations with board members. I've had a couple of different discussions with the board chair about this. And as I understand it, their biggest concern—
Can you bring the car key? You left the back windows down.
Pardon me?
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Their biggest concern and challenge is with congregating services within the downtown, and that we would be basically adding or concentrating the homeless community services within our downtown core. And I absolutely understand that concern. But the status quo situation and the reality that we are working with right now is that is where our partners are already located. It's where the Mission is located, and it's where Arches is located, and it's where these services are being provided right now. And these organizations don't have capacity to go buy property somewhere else that's not within the urban renewal area. We have not had discussions about strategically as a city whether or not we want to assist in relocating one of these organizations out of the downtown. they are where they are. They've chosen to be where they are. The Mission has had its presence downtown for a very long time. Arches has made a significant investment where they are. And in the Arches building, they have federal funds and state funds that have funded improvements in that building. They're tied to that building until they meet their grant obligations. So it is where the partners are, and it happens to be downtown. And that is just the reality of what that situation is.
Thank you, Director. Member Nordyke, did you have a question?
I did, and thank you. I think these are really great questions that my fellow members on Budget Committee are bringing up. And I have a slightly different question. I know that earlier this year, when the legislature was still in session, we were hoping that the legislature would provide some funds for this navigation center. And I now see that we have a proposal to use these Urban Renewal Agency funds for that project. Should we assume that this navigation center funding from the state legislature is now off the table?
We are not making the assumption that it's off the table, but we are thinking that some of those funds, if not all of those funds, could be used for operations rather than for the property acquisition.
Thank you.
Okay, Member Hoy.
Thank you. I was wanting to shift gears if we're done with that topic.
Surveying the group, I think you can shift gears.
Thank you. I would like to direct your attention to project number 212 on page 44. That's the Lone Oak Bridge. I was surprised to see this in our list and would like to hear how it got back in here and just some more information about it.
Which page, Chris? Which?
Page 44.
Budget Officer Eggleston, could you direct us to the appropriate city staff member to answer Member Hoy's questions?
I'm going to see if Peter Fernandez, Public Works Director, is available.
Director Fernandez.
I am here. We're in the conference room, so I'm the person waving. I assume you can hear me, and I'm going to ask our city engineer Brian Martin to fill us in on the funding there. I believe that it is just some SDC monies that are available in later years to get the project moved along, but I want Brian to confirm that.
Good evening, committee members. Okay, there we go. Yes, that is in fact correct. Just it's a placeholder for design to begin. It's a much more expensive project than the $1 million that you've seen. It's closer to 5 million, but this at least would get design started.
I was under the impression that we had come up with a plan that the city wouldn't be spending that money on that project.
Councilor, if you see the funds, those are SDC funds. So I think we've always talked about that there is, because there's a lot of development out there, that project is SDC eligible. So it's, SDC funds are really developer funded dollars. So there's always going to be a component of SDC in the project. And then the remainder will be from development that, dollars that come from the additional developments that are going on out in that area.
This is a project that continues to move out with each year, so it just gets shifted a year further until the other funding is identified.
Thank you.
So does that mean that until other funding is identified, nothing will move forward with that funding that's currently under the fiscal year 2023 all the way to 2025? Will just keep moving?
Well, what happens, Councilor Leung, is we can't design a project too early or else the plans get stale. So at some point, there has to be sufficient construction dollars to be able to get going. But we do not want to forget the project. So as Josh mentions, what you might see is that we're not going to forget the project, but it will continue to sit in the CIP, perhaps out in year 3 until additional monies are are identified, or we start to see more development and more dollars coming in to fund the project. So, Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't have anything else to add, Peter.
Member McCoy.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, but I thought that was what the reimbursement district was for, to fund that bridge.
Right, that's correct, but you got to have development to have money coming into the reimbursement district. So there are subdivisions out there that are subject to that. In fact, there are subdivisions on the south end of that are building the remainder of Lone Oak Road. But as we're collecting monies, the bridge remains. So this is really just speaking to the bridge itself.
So then again, as my understanding is why that reimbursement district was even founded, was to get enough money to build the bridge and not be tapping into other pots of money.
Yeah, but again, Member McCoy, okay, former Councilor McCoy. So, the SDC funds are completely appropriate for something like this because it's driven by development. So there is funding available. There's development out there. This is an important project. So we feel that it's completely appropriate to have some money in the pot. If the reimbursement district generates enough money, then we would pull the SDC money.
Okay. And what happens if you spend the SDC money and then you end up with an excess money in the reimbursement district?
Well, we're never going to give it back. So, we would reimburse we would reimburse the SDC fund completely. So even if we pre-spend SDC, we would, if there was more money in the reimbursement district, we would reimburse the SDC fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Member Kaiser.
Thank you. Director Fernandez, we had I remember a lengthy conversation about this at a council meeting, and I want to say it was maybe 2, possibly 3 years ago. I don't recall exactly. Is this following council direction that was given at that meeting? Because I'm just a bit confused. My understanding was that the developer of this project was supposed to pay for this bridge originally and did not do that. And then it hung around for a few years, kind of in a limbo, not sure who was supposed to pay for it. And then after a conversation with the council, we decided that the city was not going to pay for it because the developer should have in the first place. So I would be, I'm glad we're gonna not take a vote on this tonight, because I would certainly appreciate having a lot more information about this project and especially that decision that the council made, I think it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the council created, ultimately, after we had that long conversation, the council created the reimbursement district, and the reimbursement district awaits development. So I think we've been clear that reimbursement districts they're not a taxing district. They're paid as development occurs, as building permits are pulled. So as those building permits are pulled, then money will come into that fund that's reserved for the bridge. But and we'll pull the staff report. It's been a little while, but I'm certain that we talked about SDCs and we'll confirm that and we'll let you know. But as I say, SDC funds are a perfectly appropriate fund. They can't be used for anything else. So it's either this project or a different transportation project. And this is just what this is showing you is that we're reserving some SDC funds out in years 3, 4, and 5. So, and if nothing else, it's telling the community that we have not forgotten about this project, and we continue to track it and hope to start the planning and planning for the construction of the project.
It would be great to have those documents and to bring them back for the next week's meeting. So thank you.
Well.
Member Anderson, Tom Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. One other element of that, I agree with what Councilors McCoy and Kaiser have said. but we also spent a whole lot of time on the reimbursement district allocating 100% or 50% or 75% or 25%, depending on how close they were to the bridge itself and how much they might be served by the bridge, as opposed to some alternative way of getting north to Salem. So, you know, I think that we're hoping that the city will not be paying for it out of any general funds, but it'll come out of SDCs and more appropriately out of reimbursement for the areas south of the bridge that'll be served by the bridge.
That is absolutely correct, Councilor.
Okay, thank you, Member Anderson. Anything else on that project before we move to other questions? Okay, I'll take a moment of privilege. Director Fernandez, just wanted to thank you for project number 632, the multimodal safety crossings. It's really great to see that in the budget. I would appreciate to see more planned spending on multimodal crossings in years 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the capital improvement plan. I understand they're connected to a Department of Transportation funding stream as well. The work of your team to put together the GIS map where citizens can go in and give information about crossings of their concern, I think is a great addition, and I'm glad to see your staff addressing it. And I'd hope to see us spend more than that in fixing some of those crossings throughout the city.
Thank you, Chair Tigan. If I appreciate that. That obviously, Julie Warnicki, our transportation planner, worked hard to obtaining that funding from the SCATS program and the ODOT funds. If you look at the program, the very next one, Project 711, is the amount of money that we propose every year in the transportation budget for crossings. So there's an amount to base it to perhaps do 1 or 2 crossings, depending on how much each location costs. So we have made that commitment, and you see that in the CIP, and you'll see it in the budget as well.
Thank you, and I hope it grows as the comprehensive plan is updated to focus on more modes of transportation. Other questions on the CIP? Member Kaiser.
Thank you. I wanted to echo your comments, Mr. Chair, that I'm really happy to see also the multimodal safety crossings, especially the one at Pine and Maple. That was the intersection where we had some lives lost there with a crash. So, and then the other ones as well. So yeah, thank you. And I did have another separate question, if I may.
Please.
All right. I was looking through this and I noticed that Marine Drive is not in here at all. And this is another thing that council decided, I think it was last year, I want to say, that we'd be funding Marine Drive and the acquisition of right-of-way. Just curious, is that not in here because it's not considered a capital improvement, or yeah, help me understand that.
Sure, Councilor. Remember that the CIP is a plan for future funding. Those decisions related to Marine Drive have already been made, and so those monies are carried in the capital budget. And as we continue to spend on the right-of-way acquisitions, that's where the money resides. It's no longer in the CIP.
Thank you.
You'll find it on page 204, Project 12. It's a carryover project in the budget book, but it's not in this. It's not in the capital improvement plan.
Thank you,
said
Budget
204?
Officer.
Page 204 in the book 1 of the budget.
Thank you.
Okay, let me canvass. Member Tom Anderson.
Thank you. I'm going to sound like a broken tape or a skipped record here, and I haven't had a chance to, as I said, really delve into this CIP, and I will be doing that before the next meeting, but I will bring up my 2 projects I talk about all the time. And first one is solar panels on the library, and if there's a response now, great. If not, I'd like a response next meeting. And also, and this goes mostly to Director Rutherford, but also a little bit to Director Fernandez, the hanging bridge on Commercial Street. And I noticed that the head of the Urban Renewal, the first page of that shows exactly where that hanging bridge, you could stand right there and look at that. So that's where the hanging bridge is going to go over. So I would like some response at some point to both those questions. Thank you.
Director Rutherford.
I will start with the funding piece of this, and that this project is within the boundaries of the South Waterfront Urban Renewal Area and is dependent on funding. And we do have limited funding within that urban renewal area. Now, whether or not through public works funds, there are other resources that may be able to help advance that project, I'm going to defer to Director Fernandez.
Well, the bridge will come as part of the project to do that walkway. So we have not forgotten it's an important piece of that project, but there's no money yet identified for doing that project. So when that comes, then that piece of the scope will be in there. But what we have for now is the nice bank, and the trees are growing.
Terrific, and I'll keep reminding both of you until we get there. And I'm wondering though, why don't we put some sort of placeholder on this, just like we just discussed for Lone Oak Bridge?
Because we actually have funds for Lone Oak Bridge through SDCs. There are no funds yet for the project. So recall that the CIP is for monies that are either available or reasonably anticipated, and we're still not there on the walkway out there.
Okay, Member Bennett.
Thank you. Is there a specific project or set of projects we're waiting on then to get the funding that Councilor Anderson is looking for here?
Yeah, I'll answer that from the urban renewal perspective. So we have just spent the resources that we had on hand, most of the resources on the stream bank restoration and contributing to that project. This urban renewal area is a newer one, and it's a smaller one. And the largest development within this urban renewal area are the apartments, the South Block apartments. And they currently are participating in the MUTIP tax abatement program. And so we won't start realizing significant increment in this urban renewal area until they are through their abatement period. So we'll see, significant amount of tax increment come onto the rolls at that time. But right now we're just capturing kind of the 3% a year in growth, and that doesn't build up quickly. And so the first big project that we did was participating in the stream restoration. And then, as we collect more increments over time and have the funds available, then we will be able to contribute to the trail and the bridge project.
And Chair Teigen, if I may, I've gotten confirmation for Councilor Anderson's other question that the solar panels are currently included in the library project, $244,000, and it's part of our meeting the state requirement to spend 1.5% of the total construction contract on green energy. So you will see them when the project is completed.
Terrific. Thank you very much for that.
And just to give you the context, we get about $450,000 a year in tax increment in that urban renewal area until the MUTIP program is over for the South Block apartments.
And when is that expected to end?
Oh, I think we have probably 6 years left on that.
Okay. Thank you, Director Rutherford. Other questions regarding the CIP? Member Leong.
Thank you. I just have a general comment under page 56. under the downtown alley signage. I remember that last year we had asked the committee members to vote on names on the downtown alleys, and people had decided on names. And it looks like there's about 80,000 that's set aside for this upcoming fiscal year. And I'm just wondering, is that a good use of the funds right now, considering what we are going through in our communities?
Thank you, Member Leung. Maybe maybe a helpful description of what the $80,000 goes towards. If it's just the signage, is there other portions to that that would need to be covered by that $80,000? Budget Officer Eggleston, could you suggest a member of staff to address that question?
That'll either be Director Rutherford or Director Fernandez. It's URA funding, but it's a streets project.
Well, I know I'll take a stab at it. I know the names were selected, and I know we're ready to. I think there's some small signs that are going to be installed at the entrances, but I think there's a more a better part of that project. And I see Kristen is up again, so take it from here, Kristen.
All right, thank you for that. I was slow in getting unmuted and back on video. So there are names that have been selected. There are signs on poles that can go into the alley areas, but we were contemplating really broadly implementing this as we also implement the streetscape project, because some of the indicators of the alleyways are going to be stamped names within the concrete. And that's dependent on the implementation of the streetscape project.
Okay, thank you for that response. I think the question of whether it's a, the staff can help us identify how that money is going to get spent, whether it's a wise use or this is the time to do the project, I suppose can be reserved for our deliberations on the budget in general.
And if I may, as you deliberate, please remember that URA funds can only be used for capital projects.
Thank you. Member Kaiser.
Thank you. I have a question about project 750. It's on page 49. And this is the Wallace 2nd Street project. And just curious, this is to fund phase 1 of that. And sorry, maybe it's not. There it is, page 49, yes, at the top. Just curious what phase 1 entails for, what do you get for $1 million in phase 1 of constructing 2nd Street from Wallace to Girth?
Director Rutherford again, I believe that this is just design, no construction at this point. And so the phase 1 is completing the design work along 2nd Street by where Oregon Fruit was up to Wallace, because there is redevelopment interest in that area. So we want to have the design plans ready to go.
And refresh my memory, I think we talked about doing an underpass there. Is that correct? That's still the preferred.
We have looked at the undercrossing and an overcrossing in that location, and the undercrossing is the preferred. The overcrossing has significant access impacts to the Goodwill site. I'm sorry, I'm tracking a note here saying that the Girth piece they are looking at constructing in next fiscal year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Member William Anderson.
Just a follow-up question about the Wallace Road 2nd Street. A few moments ago, we were told that designs become stale after a period of time. And so if we spend $1 million this coming fiscal year doing the design and then nothing for the next 4 years, can you clarify as to how the design wouldn't then become stale?
So as I followed up, they are looking at, they will be constructing the Girth portion of this. So they will be constructing that within 2 years.
Okay, thank you. I am sensing a lull in the questions on the CIP, knowing that we have the ability to continue this conversation at our next meeting, and before we entertain a motion to adopt it. I'm going to just, Member Bennett? Or was it, I'm sorry, City Manager Powers.
Thank you. I would just want to echo and reinforce what Member Bennett said as far as if there are specific questions about projects, please contact us. Please contact staff, and we can go into whatever detail you would like on any project to assist you in your deliberations next week. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager Powers. Member Nordyke.
I just had a general observation, and I wanted to clarify to see if my understanding is correct. When I look on page 9 of the CIP, and it looks at CIP projects by funding source, I see that the general fund appears to be a very small portion of these overall CIP funding sources. I see, for example, for fiscal year 2021, general fund 4.7 million and some change, but the total funds are almost 100 million. And I want to make sure I understand this. Am I correct in understanding that the general fund actually makes up a relatively small portion of the overall funding sources for our capital improvement projects?
Yes, that is correct. It is a relatively small. And then further, just for that specific number for the 4.7 million for the general fund, 3.7 million of it is the internal borrowing. So the direct payment for general fund is relatively low. It includes things like the SPIF grants, playground rehabilitation, IT, small facilities projects, that type of thing.
Thank you.
Okay, I will, maybe I'll entertain a motion, Budget Officer Eggleston, for a 5-minute break before we move into our next phase of the meeting.
You don't need a motion for that.
You don't need a motion, you can just call a break.
All right, we'll break for 5 minutes. Let's come back, actually come back at 7:50 business. Budget Officer Josh Eggleston, are you with us?
I am, thank you.
Okay. Budget Officer Josh Eggleston will now present overviews of result area budgets. In between each result area presentation, there will be an opportunity for the Budget Committee to ask questions of staff and to discuss result area budget information. Rather than introducing Josh each time, we will allow him to begin the next presentation when there are no further questions or discussion. Take it away, Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just share my screen. Before we get into the first results area, just a couple overview slides on the budget. Development of this budget was guided by this council's strategic plan, which provides our mission, vision, and values, defines expectations of the council and community framed within the policy priorities. The annual policy agenda, which is informed by input from residents and interested groups, transitions from goals to actions that can be supported in the upcoming fiscal budget. The policy agenda relies on continuous feedback through resident satisfaction surveys, city boards and commissions, neighborhood associations, and testimony at city council and budget committee meetings. The role of the budget committee is integral to this annual cycle, as the committee receives the budget proposal from the city manager, provides those opportunities for community feedback at committee meetings, sets the property tax levy each year, and makes a budget recommendation to council. This year, as Steve mentioned, the budget has been framed within the city's result areas. The result areas help to answer the question of what the city is in the business of doing and why. Tonight, we'll be covering all 6 areas, the Capital Improvement Fund and the Urban Renewal Area Agency budgets. This display shows the city's total expenditure budget of $667 million broken into the 6 results areas and construction funds. As you can see, the constructions fund make up the largest portion, followed by safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure and safe community. We also included a new financial summary on page 234 that displays the results area budgets by fund. The budget display, the budget document, converts hundreds of line item entries into programs that align with the results the community cares about. The goal of priority-based budgeting is to ensure the resources are being applied to the highest and best use to achieve those results. In the budget, each result area is set off by a tab with the result area name and icon. To allow us to compile the budget publication, each program has been assigned a home results area. Each tab section lists across multiple pages all of the programs assigned to that home results area. The program details include the proposed fiscal year 2020 budget, as well as the current year adopted budget for comparison. On the right, the check marks indicate uninfluenced, anywhere from minor to essential in each of the results areas. The alignment column describes the most, more, less, or least aligned with the overall result areas. A less or least alignment doesn't mean that the city can or should stop providing the service. The less or least score could mean that the program has a strong influence or essential influence in only a single result area. There could also be federal or state mandates that require the city to have that program. The result areas also have 2 new summary displays that show the result area budget by department and fund. This helps tie the entire budget together from the results area summary that I mentioned before, and then the individual results areas by department and the fund. To help explain some of the position increases within results areas, this table summarizes the seasonal conversion the City Council approved in July 2020. Before this action, some part-time exempt and seasonal positions performed the same work as career status employees. The part-time exempt and seasonal positions have different pay and benefits than full-time positions. Effective January 1, 2019, a revision to the Oregon Pay Equity Law requires positions that perform comparable work to be compensated equitably. To address this new requirement and improve equity and compensation for comparable work, a total of 14.65 FTE career positions were converted from part-time exempt positions. I can take a quick break here if there are any questions on these few slides before we get into safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure.
Let me see if I can get a full view of the crowd here. Budget Officer Eggleston, I guess I can warm it up. In terms of, will we see a decrease in the amount of seasonal hiring in across the city from the conversion of those full-time employees, to full-time?
Right, so you'll see a corresponding decrease to the seasonal relief line across budgets.
Thank you. Member Hoy.
Thank you. This might be a question for Ms. Hanson. I'm curious if there's going to be any sort of review of the Pay Equity Act in terms of its impact on local governments for exactly these kinds of situations where we are maybe not employing people that we might have in the past because we're no longer allowed to in the manner in which we used to do it. So it's actually having a negative impact, I would say, in some places. So I'm just curious, is there going to be any sort of review of this for potential revisions?
This is Mina Hansen, Director of HR. I don't believe there's any planned reviews of the law, but what we did, Councillor Hoy, was created separate and classifications specifically for work that is seasonal. Our dilemma was we had what we called part-time exempt staff that were doing the exact same work as our career staff, shoulder to shoulder, and we could not distinguish them apart. So we've established some really clear guidelines for departments about what makes somebody a seasonal employee, what makes them an intern, and set up real clear parameters on the differences in the work and the differences of the assignments to remove us from the pay inequities.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Okay, I think you can proceed, Mr. Eggleston.
Safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure is the first of the 6 result areas we'll review this evening. The safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure begins on page 89 of the budget publication. Each of these result areas is set up in a similar way with 4 or 5 slides. And then there's an opportunity for questions at the end of each area. This result area has a total budget of $141.3 million, approximately 21% of total citywide expenditures. The constructions fund have a total budget of $235.1 million, representing an additional 35% of the total expenditure budget. There's 283.7 full-time equivalent positions included in this results area.
Good question.
Boy has a question.
Sorry, but I thought you said that we were on
Please.
page 89, but this looks like you're talking about stuff from page 117. So I'm confused on where we're at.
I apologize. It's on page 117 of the budget document.
Thank you, Member Hoy. You can proceed.
For workforce changes in this results area, there's 10 additional positions proposed. 5 of those positions support the new ozone treatment, as well as a position to manage field survey work, another sweeper operator in the daytime shift, and then 2 laborers in transportation that are converted from seasonal positions. There are several highlights for this result area going into fiscal year 2021. Among those are improvements to the water distribution and infrastructure, as well as to the transportation system in multiple areas. In the early spring of 2020, the utility received $60 million for a sale in revenue bonds. The bonds will be used for construction of an ozone treatment facility, treatment filter improvements, and groundwater wells, among other water and wastewater capital needs. A rendering of the treatment facility is shown here. Transportation has several enhancement plans for this next fiscal year also, with pedestrian intersection, street, and sidewalk improvements. Some projects include a pedestrian island and crossing safety improvements on State Street, Lancaster Drive and River Road, flashing beacon at intersection of Dokes Ferry and Eola, widening of Hawthorne Avenue and Sunnyview Road, and Hollywood Drive roadway improvements. Staff are available for questions on the safe and reliable and efficient infrastructure result area.
Mr. Eggleston, could you minimize your presentation so I can see the group? Thank you. Member Hoy, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a question for Mr. Fernandez. Regarding the FTE for the additional sweeper, I was under the impression that we didn't have the equipment to support additional FTE. Are we buying more equipment, or was I just misinformed?
Yeah, no, we'll have to buy a new sweeper. I just want to say, in addition to that, Councilor Hoy, that we've had the same 2 sweeper operators for, I think, over 25 years, almost 30 years. So with the growth in town, we felt it was just time to add another sweeper to the rotation, and with that, another operator.
I'm excited as a cyclist. I'm excited to see more road sweeping. So, but I was just concerned because I'd paid attention to this in the past and didn't think we had the equipment to support it. So I'm glad to see it.
Thank you.
Member Tom Anderson.
Here's another broken record for Director Fernandez. I see that we've done 54,000 plus square feet of sidewalk. What's the forecast for how many more square feet or miles or however you want to look at it we're going to do?
I think our operations manager, Mark Bechtel's on the line, so I'll let him take a stab at that.
Okay.
Mr. Bechtel.
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute. We plan to do essentially the same amount of sidewalk work this coming year as in the previous year, about $1.6 million worth of sidewalk work. I don't have the exact square footage available to me right here, but it's roughly the same amount of work as the current year.
Thank you.
Member William Anderson.
On the question of sidewalks, you had mentioned about pedestrian safety on Hollywood. On Hollywood, the sidewalk stops, partway down the street. Is it safe to assume that the pedestrian safety will extend that sidewalk for the rest of the street?
I don't know that we have a project out on Hollywood.
I could actually answer Fernandez.
Okay.
Member Hoy.
Yeah, there's a county project that is going to complete the end of Hollywood Drive, and we are doing some work, the city is, to connect with that. So ultimately, as I understand it, those sidewalks will be connected along, and there will also be a new traffic signal at Hollywood and Silverton.
Thank you, Councilor Hoy. And I see our city engineer has come on. Brian, do you have additional info, or did Councilor Hoy have it just right?
He has it just right. That's absolutely correct. Be a joint project with the county and the city.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Other questions about this result area for city staff? Okay. Budget Officer Eggleston, I'm sorry. A late wave of the hand from Member Kaiser.
Sorry, I should have
Yeah. Hello.
Just curious about the addition of a 1 FTE program manager 2 position for the public information. And I guess it's more of a general question. I know there was our PIOs and all of that was kind of changed after our water crisis we went through, but is the strategy within the city that PIOs are embedded within departments, or are we centralizing those? Could you, maybe Mr. Powers, if you wanted to talk about that?
It's a hybrid. It's both. It's a centralized messaging, centralized oversight within positions embedded in departments, so they have the knowledge and the access within the departments.
So is this additional FTE then is there an existing PIO there within Public Works, or is this just to create a new, is that function, I guess, part of Public Works now, or are they, help me understand that.
We had attempted, and Director Fernandez can join me in the response. We attempted to have that responsibility shared among other responsibilities by one person, and that turned out to be really unsustainable, both for that person as well as the needs of Public Works, which is, as you might know, is our largest department. While it doesn't perhaps have the same immediate public information needs as police or fire, certainly we have a need to make sure information about water or street projects is being shared with the community, shared broadly to inform what we're doing in our largest department.
Thank you. So this would essentially, I'm reading that this would double capacity-ish, adding about another FTE PIO type position.
Well, again, Director Fernandez can jump in here. I think the other position, I wouldn't say it would be 2 full-time equivalents dedicated just to public information. We would be adding one position that would be dedicated to public information, and there would then be a shared responsibility by another position. Is that correct, Peter?
That's correct. What we have today is Heather Dimke does our public information for us, as well as 10,000 other things. And it was the result of actually 2 retirements where the positions were mashed together, and I gave her 2 FTEs worth of work. And what we have found over the last couple of years is that communications can really eat up a significant amount of time. And we talked it over internally and decided that we really needed to create a position to give that new person the bulk of the communications and the public information work. Heather is trained. Heather can participate. We have other staff like Sarah Botmal that are trained in public information and can assist in times of crisis. But we really need in the department at this point. We feel we're to the point where we need a full-time person dedicated to that function. That's what that position's about.
Thank you.
Director Fernandez, while we've got your camera on, I'm one of the other things I do, I suppose I'm a land use chair for my neighborhood association. I've been getting engaged more in the our Salem comprehensive plan rewrite. And I do wonder, and maybe this is a little far afield from the budget committee, but I suppose it has to do with the future of all of the city departments. And I just wonder, to the extent your staff participates in that long range planning, considering a lot of it probably will have to do with transportation and things of public works. Do you have people who spend a dedicated amount of time on the comprehensive plan at this point, so it's actionable from your department's perspective?
We do. So we have a planning unit that that staff does the planning efforts for the infrastructure of the city. So we have parks planners, utility planners, transportation planners, and they are all work arm in arm with the staff at community development with all land development processes. So water issues, sewer issues, stormwater issues, transportation, parks are all part and parcel of what we do in conjunction with community development.
Great, thank you. I'll pause uncomfortably before moving on. Member Bennett, you seem almost ready to ask a question. Okay. All right, Budget Officer Eggleston, why don't you move us on?
Thank you, Chair. The next result area to review is good governance, which includes the departments and activities supporting the public-facing programs provided by the city. Those programs contained in the other result areas. Good governance has an expenditure appropriation of $112.6 million, representing 17% of the total city budget. The result area begins on, let me just make sure, page 39 of the budget publication. There are 199.68 full-time equivalent positions within the good governance result programs. Highlighted on this slide are the positions not included in the seasonal conversion. Of the general fund positions, the two programmers are being reimbursed by the utility funds. The majority of the positions are associated with the opening of the new police station, and there are 4 custodians and 1 HVAC technician and a department tech analyst. Within good governance, there are several notable enhancements. Over the past 2 years, the city organization has been shifting its management practices toward a one city enterprise approach to help achieve the goals and outcomes of the Salem strategic plan and improve the equity, effectiveness, and efficiency of city services. Some of the projects include a customer service center shared services framework that'll eventually reside in the first floor at the Civic Center, a strategic plan update, and a comprehensive fee study. As we've discussed earlier this evening, included in the proposed budget is debt service for an internal loan from the utility fund to complete several projects at the Civic Center campus. The projects include physical security enhancements as rendered on the picture on the slide. This is looking into the atrium from down below toward the right of the council chambers. Another project is the transformer replacement for the City Hall and Library. This project is timely and coincides with the seismic upgrades at the library. With the police department moving to the new station, there's also the $958,000 that we've also talked about this evening, funding for a proposed for a basic reconfiguration of the first floor at City Hall. The city self-insures for workers' compensation. Through safety prevention and claims management, the city's experience has been better than forecasted by our outside actuarial studies. The improved performance allows a 1-year suspension of internal charges to departments that fund workers' compensation. The 1-year suspension is $1.2 million in savings for the general fund and is used to fund one-time expenditures. The city's general fund budget also includes $240,000 additional dollars for funding environmental hazardous waste cleanup around the city. This will allow mitigation and cleanup of any heavily used or unsanitary areas on city property. Staff are now available for questions on the good governance results area. And I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see.
Member Bennett.
I just a quick congratulations to the city staff on that workers' comp situation. That kind of successful year and the impact it has on our budget is just really a positive thing, and particularly its impact on the workforce. I really think that's a notable achievement, is to get those the lower incidents and have the rate impact. Really, really pleased. And I don't mean it relative to Councilor Anderson's occupation. He's doing fine with other clients that can't do the job our people do.
Okay, Member McCoy.
Thank you. You know, in the finance budgeting departments, there's all kinds of movement around there. Could somebody explain that a little better for me? Can I figure out what you did? You moved departments, and I can see cashiering went from 460,000 to 139, and you know there's ups and downs. But I think when it's all said and done, it evened out. You just are using different people in different places.
That could be part of it. The other thing is there could be program allocations that are getting refined. So every year as we do the priority-based budgeting and the program budgeting, you might allocate your time one way, and then you might keep track of it and then allocate it a different way. So we're seeing that fluctuation still. And I would anticipate next year to be even closer to the actual cost per program.
Okay, any other questions on the good governance area? Member Sund.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted a little bit more information because I'm not familiar with the process of the tourism promotion area fee pass-through in the non-departmental summary of services and programs on page 62.
So this last year, the City Council approved the creation of the tourism promotion area. So it's a fee charged to lodging associations, and the city has the authority to actually implement the fee, but it's passing through to Travel Salem. So the city collects some receipts along with the lodging tax, and then we pass it along to Travel Salem, or our our tourism promotion provider. It wouldn't necessarily be Travel Salem, but that's the current contract.
Member Bennett.
And just to add to that, this was requested by the travel industry, the hotel folks, hotel motel folks. So it's a fee they charge themselves to promote the travel industry here.
And the city does collect some just for administration of it.
Thank you. I have one more question.
Please go ahead.
Just really quickly, I know I think there might have been some correspondence on this, but in the finance department specifically, last year, I do believe there was the budget officer position was being relinquished. Obviously, it's not been relinquished. Mr. Eggleston is here with us, but so how did that transpire, or I guess was there movement with other FTEs or?
Sure, I don't know if Steve or Bob, the CFO, if you want to hop on and answer that question.
Sure, thanks for the question. We had a retiring employee, Kelly Jacobs, that was the budget manager. And then we had another gentleman, David. What was David's last name, Josh?
David Lacey.
David Lacey, who had left, and he was a treasury manager. They had funded David's position and defunded Kelly's position. Well, then, and then they created the CFO role that I replaced. I have a great deal of experience in investments and the treasury function. And so I thought I needed more leadership in the budget area than I did in the treasury. So I assumed that role and transferred. I made a proposal to Human Resources. They reviewed it and then got approval through Steve Powers that allowed me to move that budgeted position for the Treasury Manager to the budget officer position.
Thank you, Mr. Barron.
Thank you.
Any other questions for this result area? Okay, I think you can move to the next result area, Budget Officer Eggleston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next result area to review for the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget is the Natural Environment Stewardship. It is on page 71. Programs for this result area are managed by the Public Works Department and focus on environmental compliance, monitoring, and education. The Natural Environment Stewardship result area has just over 19 million in proposed funding with 4 major program groupings. There are 91.95 full-time equivalent positions within this result area's programs. For workforce changes, there's 2 additional positions added to assist Public Works with mapping and asset management, a GIS analyst and a GIS technician. The proposed budget includes funds for the continuation of the climate action plan for the city of Salem. We've received quite a bit of testimony regarding that. Additionally, the successful street tree planting program will continue for its 3rd year in fiscal year 2021. Since its inception, the program has planted over 15,000 trees and shrubs in the community. These trees provide a number of benefits to the community and environment. This is a little bit shorter result area. Staff are now available for questions on the Natural Environment Stewardship result area.
Member Tom Anderson.
Thank you. I had to unmute. I want to join the many people who publicly testified about the climate action plan. And I appreciate the fact that we're moving forward, and I look to great results from that. I don't know if this is the right place to say this or put this in or not, but I thought it kind of came under natural environmental stewardship. And I guess it also comes under climate action plan. I'm back on electric cars. And, you know, maybe it comes under fleet services or someplace else, but part of the reason we would purchase electric cars for the parts of the city's fleet that do not need gas-powered cars or gas-powered vehicles is for environmental stewardship. So I don't know how that fits in, but I've said this a number of times. I would like to see us moving toward electric cars when at all feasible.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Mr. Sund.
So the 150,000 for the climate action plan, where does that take us?
Good question. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I got it, Josh. Thank you, Member Sund. So last year, I believe there was extensive discussion at the Budget Committee about what a climate action plan might cost. The budget committee ended up allocating $50,000. We weren't quite sure what to do with that. We in public, the whole idea of climate action planning ended up being assigned to the Public Works Department. We hired an intern to do a first step, which is something that the city manager had talked to the budget committee about last year, called the Climate Actions Audit Report, because we wanted to get a handle on what the city had already done. We've actually been doing environmental planning and climate action work for many years. We've just never really called it that. That work was completed. We found that compared to adopted climate action plans in other communities, we're at, I forget the number, 20, 30, 40% of actions completed. And then as a part of that, we also developed a scope of work to how to get to a complete climate action plan, and also got a sense of exactly how much a climate action plan would cost. So we didn't spend the $50,000, we funded the intern. We just absorbed that in the Public Works budget. So now the request is for the $100,000 to have $150,000 for the consultant to take us through a complete climate action plan process. I'm happy to report that the request for proposals is already on the street. We expect a proposal soon, so assuming the budget committee and council passes the amount requested, we'll have a consultant on board the 1st of July.
Thank you, Director.
Member Davis.
Hi, so just a curious question here. So you're saying that we've had things in the works, we just haven't been calling them that. We have had an audit, we're already doing things environmentally. Why would we spend $150,000 just for a plan if it's something we already have in place? I don't get the logic there.
Yeah, thank you. What we learned is that you really need the plan to set for the council for the community to help the council set goals. We've never operated on a goals-based system for climate action. What we've done is just good work, and I can provide the report. There's a lot of good work that the city's done over the last decade of doing these things, but we really don't have a place to, where are we going with all of this? There's many more things that can be done. So a climate action plan is really about setting policy, setting goals for the future. And I believe that that's where, the council has asked us to look into, and that's where we're headed with this, and really have an opportunity to engage all facets of the community, many stakeholders in doing this climate action planning. So I know there's a lot of, 350 Salem has been very vocal, but we've heard from the power companies and the natural gas company that they want to be a part of this because they have a lot of good ideas on how they can help us. So we think it's going to be a really good process once we get underway.
So just so I'm clear, the $150,000 is so that we will have goals. We're paying for goals. Am I on track with that?
Well, goals is a part of it. It's for a complete plan to give us the roadmap on what else we can do into the future.
Okay, thank you.
Member Hoy. Member Hoy, you're on mute. Member Hoy, check your mute, your microphone.
Sorry about that. I thought I had unmuted. I was holding my finger on the space bar. I was going to just say that if there are members of the committee that have questions on this, there's a great document that Peter referenced that was produced by the intern that really just outlines exactly where we're at and exactly where we need to head. It's really well written, very comprehensive, and a quick read that really outlines the whole thing. And it's far more than just setting goals. There's a whole plan to it, and I encourage people to read that document.
Thank you, Member Hoy. Member Leung?
That sort of answered my question. Never mind.
Okay, thank you. Member Chirac?
Yeah, I remember last year's budget hearing, we did receive information that about $150,000 was the ballpark amount to do a good climate action plan. I think that's what Corvallis did actually spend, and something similar for Eugene. So I'm happy to see that amount. We couldn't find that money last year to do it. And then a related issue is the RFP that went out to, find a consultant to do this. Is it at all similar to how the climate action plan research was structured in some of the other Oregon cities? I mean, were those looked at, say Corvallis's plan, Eugene, were they looked at to get a sense of what we might want to do?
Yes, Member Chirac, it drew from the work that we got from the intern and the work that had been done in Corvallis and in cities throughout Oregon. We looked at every adopted climate action plan in Oregon, as well as some of the better ones throughout the country to develop the RFP based on that.
Thank you, Director Fernandez. Other questions? Member Lewis.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about the climate action plan. I recognize that we're not the first to do it, so I would assume that there are municipalities that have not only created a plan, but have started the process of implementation. And my question, I guess, is the plan that we are going to be putting together, is it going to include aspects of implementation, or does that come with another plan?
No, Councilor Lewis, it'll give us the roadmap for implementation. The bulk of the money, the reason that the amount of money is necessary, as we learned about other action plans, as we talked to consultants that have done these kinds of plans, is really the level of public involvement that is required to really get the input and the buy-in from all facets of the community. So that's where a lot of the effort is going to be in developing that roadmap for where we're going to go.
So if I follow up, so it is really inspirational as a practical matter. This plan's not going to include situations where if we don't meet goals, we'll do this. I think Councilor Anderson mentioned a while back the sticks that need to come along with it. I'm more curious in those aspects of a plan than I am just what our goals might be. And so I'm curious when those issues come into the plan. When do we start hearing about what steps we will be taking or have to take to accomplish our goals?
Yeah, so ultimately, this will be a plan that will come to council for adoption. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of conversation about how much, what kinds of incentives and what kinds of disincentives the council will want to adopt as those things are proposed. So I think that's going to be that conversation, and ultimately that adoption is going to be a big part of the plan. So I can't tell you right now what they're going to be. I think that remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you, Director Fernandez. How about Member Nanke?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what's the timing for completion of that plan and the public input process?
Yeah, it's tracking with the our Salem project. So they'll run on their own individual tracks, but it's about the same time. And I have
December 1, 2021.
December, yeah. I have Assistant Director Chandler here with me. So December 2021 is the scheduled completion date.
Excellent. Thanks.
Member Sund.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is general fund money. Just overall, I'm not sure if we already addressed, but overall, how much of working capital are we using in this budget? The overall budget, not just the natural and environmental stewardship.
Great question. I can go back to a slide. Just 1 second. So as Steve went over as part of his presentation, here you can see, can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can.
Okay, great. So here you can see the adopted budget from last year. You can see the proposed budget, and you can see the total budgeted resources and total budget expenditures, and then the ending fund balance. As you can see from the beginning balance, we're budgeting some use of working capital. But when you switch to what we're actually forecasting to use, we estimate a savings amount of 5.26 million. And that has a couple pieces. One is unspent contingency. So we budget at $3 million for the contingency, but we plan, generally we have about $2.5 million of it left. We don't use it, so we plan on that. And then we also plan on 2% of expenditures being kind of organic savings, just from position vacancies and turnover and retirements, that type of thing. So we're actually planning for this proposed budget. It has an addition of working capital of approximately $610,000.
So that, or I have a follow-up, Chair.
Of course.
So the 610,000 addition fund balance is after those adjustments that we typically see that are more on the forecasted side that you just referenced.
Yes,
so
that's exactly correct.
Okay. So if we did need to use contingency, then that would be a different use of fund balance.
Correct, yes. Or if we didn't achieve the 2% savings,
Right.
which can happen also. But generally, if you look back at multiple years, we see that 2%.
Budget Officer Eggleston, can you explain the difference between the ending fund balance in the FY 2020 adopted budget and the beginning fund balance in the FY 2021 proposed budget? There's a $10 million difference in those numbers.
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, we're talking about two budgets with their full appropriation. So in these, there's no estimate for savings. So for the fiscal year 2020, we didn't end with $10.26 million, and we didn't think we would, because we have that savings expectations for contingency and for vacancy. So what we're anticipating ending fiscal year 2020 with, and we still have a couple months here to go, is $20.51 million.
So just to dumb it down for me, that's $10 million more than we anticipated.
Correct. A big piece of this is the operations fee. So
okay.
in this fiscal year, we're seeing 6 months of the operation fee revenue coming in.
Okay. I have to get it basic sometimes. I was hired to run the Zoom call, not to crunch numbers.
And again, just so this working capital number, this 2.51, we set that, I would say a month and a half, 2 months ago, and we continue to operate. Things continue to change. I guarantee it won't be $20.51 million. It'll be higher or it'll be lower.
Thank you. I will go back to the floor for any further questions on this result area. We still have 3 more to go after this. Okay, Budget Officer Eggleston, will you please move us along?
Will do. Just let me find the correct one. With the exception of the infrastructure results area that we reviewed earlier this evening, the city dedicates the largest portion of available funding toward a safe community. The Safe Community Result Area is funded at just over $116 million, and the Result Area provides various services that support a safe Salem community. The Safe Community has the most positions with a total of 542.02 FTEs within the Result Area programs, and you can find it on page 89. In the Safe Community, there are 4 new positions that are being proposed, with 1 officer in the general fund that is funded by Marion County with the Behavioral Health Unit, and then 1 in Building Safety, and then 2 at the Willamette Valley Communications Center out of the WVCC fund. Through the city's partnership with Marion and Polk counties, the Salem Police Department pairs specially trained officers with qualified mental health professionals to help people experience a behavioral health crisis. During fiscal year 2020, Marion County increased their annual funding to the city to add an additional position for this unit. The position is funded through an intergovernmental agreement with the county and is included in this proposed budget, and we just went over it on the previous slide. And then also, beginning with fiscal year 2020, a new fund was created to segregate revenues from photo red light and speed on green tickets. This fund is called the Traffic Safety Fund and supports a position in municipal court, finance, and along with reserve officers who review the citations. There are currently plans to add 3 new locations for speed on green and photo red light in fiscal year 2021 to improve traffic safety for pedestrians, bikers, and drivers through behavior modification efforts. Finally, the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget sees the completion of the police station approved by voters in 2017 through a bond measure. The facility will open for business in the fall of this year, and plans are underway to transition the force to the new facility. And staff are now available for questions on the Safe Community Results Area.
I'll start with Member Nordyke.
Thank you. And so earlier this year, I sat down with a police officer at Salem Police Department because I was very curious to learn more about this behavioral health unit that they're working on and that has been in place for some time now, actually. And I'm intrigued to see that there's interest in expanding that. I know that we have a lot of mental health crises going on around the nation, and our city is no exception. And I'm wondering, do we have anyone from the police department to explain more in terms of how would an expansion of the police's behavioral health unit help people, especially during the pandemic? So I'd be curious to hear if there's more information on that. And also, I know that while they're waiting to queue up the right person, obviously persons who are chronically homeless oftentimes have chronic mental illness. So I see real potential for this program to ultimately save us money in the long run. Do we have anyone from the police department present today to give a little more information about what this behavioral health unit expansion could do?
Please, Chief Moore.
Yeah, good evening. Can you hear me?
Indeed.
All right. Jerry Moore with the police department. Good evening, budget committee members and Councilor Nordyke. Thanks for your question. Our current behavioral health unit consists of a sergeant who supervises both our team and some of the teams from Marion and Polk County, and 3 officers, all of which are grant funded. 2 of them work in Marion County and 1 in Polk County. There's also Marion County Sheriff's Office and Polk County Sheriff's Office, and I believe Woodburn has an officer assigned as well. So the group is expanding, but is all grant funded because we don't currently have the ability to fund them ourselves, quite frankly. Councilor Nordyke is correct. Many of the homeless population are often in mental health crisis, and this team is designed not only to respond to cases where people are in an emotional disturbance and maybe a threat to themselves, but they also do follow up on occasion when they're not responding to calls for service, so that they're able to follow up on some of the incidents they responded on to try and make sure that people are taking their medication, for instance, or improving their life condition. So that's what we use the behavioral health unit for.
Thank you, Chief Moore. Oh, go ahead, Member Nordic.
So it sounds like this is, having a soft touch with working with persons who may be struggling with severe, undertreated, untreated, or chronic mental illness. And it sounds to me like a lot of this involves building rapport, which is so important with persons struggling with mental illness. So thank you for this information. I really appreciate you sharing.
You bet. And I will tell you, I think our mental health system is completely overwhelmed. I think that anyone that has looked into the work that they have to do understand that police have become mental health professionals, whether we like it or not. There is no capacity in the system, and so I think these units are critically important.
Thank you.
Member Hoy.
Thank you.
You're back on.
How about now?
Good.
I don't know why I'm having a challenge with that. But I wanted to talk about, while we have the chief here, the speed on green and the photo radar. I understand from Josh that we have 3 new intersections that we're planning. I'm wondering, are those the 3 that we've talked about previously, or are they 3 in addition to that? And then also, Chief, if you could talk about how that program has been going in terms of, is it producing results similar to what you anticipated, or is it up or down, or where are we at?
Right. I think the ones we've had for years are probably providing us very similar results as they had in the past. We have added speed on green at 1 intersection, and quite frankly, it has had very good results in catching people that are speeding. I guess I put it that way. The 3 new intersections, Commercial and Madrona, Commercial and Kubler, and I believe it's Center and Hawthorne, are not in place as of yet. We were scheduled for probably a May introduction of them, but because of the situation with the pandemic that we're currently in, we have moved that back to at least June. And we are still monitoring the impacts of the increases on the staff of municipal court, finance, and the police department. But we anticipate those other ones, our plan would be that they would go live in June.
Thank you, Chief. And just to follow up, I don't know if it's just my perception or if it's reality, but it seems like this pandemic has brought about a lot more speeders than we typically see in the city. I know just on my residential street, it seems like people are just going a lot faster than they used to. And I don't know why that would be, but, and I understand that you've had some speeds on those speed on greens, green upward of maybe 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. Is that true?
I believe that is correct. Yes. And that would most likely be Silverton Road, but not always.
Thank you.
Member Anderson, Tom Anderson.
Thank you, Chief. Now that you're here, I've got a couple questions. You know, I go through almost all the budgetary stuff and look to see if there's some big change from 2002 to 2000 or 2020 to 2021. And on page 109, I see 2 changes, both of which I think might be related to the new police station, or maybe not, because you might not be in there that time. But one is computer forensic lab went from 350 plus to 450 plus, and the other is police reception and customer service, which nearly tripled from 770,000 to 2,100,000. I'm wondering if you could comment on those.
Right. I think all of those are reorganizations. I may have to get some help from someone on the customer service one, the police reception. But we are basically moved the deck chairs around. We've reassigned people to different assignments. We have not added any personnel other than the mental health team that we're adding in and dispatch, but no additions.
If I could have one follow-up question on the next page, Chief, and this is like good news, but it may be related to what you're talking about. I'm looking at the Regional Record System Fund Program, where we've cut it in half from $1 million to $479,000. What happened there? Is that a reassignment or is it something else?
I believe that's the purchase of a new CAD system, or I'm sorry, a new records management system. And it's our payments to the company who
they went down.
That program.
Okay,
correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Member McCoy.
Hi, Chief. I got another question on your budget, page 109. Street crimes units went from 1.4 million to 1.9. What happened there? Which big move?
You'll have to give me just a second.
If I may, so with the police programs through the priority-based budgeting, a couple years ago, they picked one way to allocate to programs, and we've seen a change between 2020 and 2021. So we're going to see some fluctuations as they're allocating overhead and programs to different programs because things just moved around and things were segregated that maybe didn't need to be, that kind of thing.
Well, that's fine, Josh, but I don't see a $500,000 change the other way anywhere. That's why I'm asking. I don't see another. You look in 2020, there's no other $500,000 change going the other way.
I can definitely follow up with a breakdown of the police programs and the specific program mapping.
I think that'll be necessary. I can't answer that question at this point.
Thank you, Chief Moore. Member William Anderson.
This is for the police chief. I noticed that patrol, the expenditure went down by about $1.25 million. Does that mean that the police will be doing less patrols?
Well, again, I think you're going to see it's reorg. I think the patrol division is about the same. We've looked at in the past year, we've created a problem-oriented policing team, and we've tried to make sure that patrol is supported, but quite frankly, it's about the same number of people, and the patrol function will remain as it has been.
And just as a quick follow-up, a lot of people on social media for the local community and in talking to people, the police is really the #1 priority that a lot of people of Salem have, wanting to support the police and the biggest concern that they have. And so that's just, I guess, somewhat feedback for, the city council that the police really are extremely important for them, and hopefully they won't be cut any further than they've already been.
Thank you.
Member Hoy.
Thank you. A question for the fire chief, if he's available to us. Just curious about the impact of the new contract on this budget, if there will need to be any sort of adjustment from where we're at right now.
Chief Niblock, if you're available.
There we go. Yes, we had, we're calculating the cost out right now. Don't expect to need to have to make any changes in the budget that we're talking about right now to be able to accommodate the contract.
Thank you.
Member McCoy.
This is for the fire chief too. Under emergency services funds on 105, the ambulance transport and on-scene patient treatment administration went up almost $200,000. And then training and certifications went from 220 to nothing. I was wondering what was going on there.
What page were you on again?
105.
Okay, give me just a second to get to that. So I'm being fed some information here from my budget analyst that program was consolidated into one program. If that answers your question.
Okay, it does. It makes
Okay.
sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think I'll take a moment as the chair. I really appreciate the service area statistics across the budgeting document, but especially for the safe community part, kind of building on what Member Anderson said. I think it's really important to connect the taxes people pay with what they get, and the numbers really tell a really compelling story on behalf of the fire and police organizations. Chief Niblock, I just need an explanation because I don't know how to read the line on the cardiac save rate of 71% that we've experienced a 22% increase. And I'm looking at the service area statistics on page 91. I just don't know how to, we've talked about that program in the past and I've bragged about it to people because I think it's pretty remarkable, but I don't know how to tell the story this year.
So our number of cardiac arrests that qualify for this program are about between 100 and 160 a year, depending on the year. So we can have some pretty wild swings if you have 3 or 4 people that don't get saved versus 3 or 4 that get saved the next year. So your percentages can change pretty rapidly. I think last year we were at 57% or 55%, which was a pretty big jump from the year before. We were down in the 33%. So it's really variable. One of the things that we are trying to do is just to continue to collect that data so people can follow it. But we are really putting some things in place that we purchased this last budget year to really help raise the cardiac save rate. We're looking at some cutting edge technology that's being used in very few places around the country where these places are routinely experiencing year after year 70 to 80% cardiac save rate for that same group of people. And we have achieved 70 and we achieved 50 some last year. We really want to get to that 80% level and be able to save more lives. And when you get to that 80% level, for us, we would be saving about 35 people a year in the community, going back to their families and their jobs. And that's a huge impact to that family and to the community. They're still employed, they're still running a business, they're still paying taxes, and they're still living their life with their family. So that's, our mission is to save lives. And so we really are focused on trying to improve our statistics there. And it's kind of a building process. We look at what's going on around the country for cutting edge technologies, and we're already looking at new things we can do next. So trying to always be just that one step ahead of where we need to be.
Great, thanks for that. Other questions for city staff in the safe community service area? Okay, thanks to Chief Niblock and Chief Moore. Josh, I believe you can move us along.
Thank you, Chair. The next is strong and diverse economy and the Urban Renewal Agency. Because of the robust connection between the programs and projects promoted by the Salem Urban Renewal Agency and the city's activities to support economic development, the Urban Renewal Agency budget and the result area of strong and diverse economy will be reviewed together. There are 2 sections that make up the strong and diverse economy result area: the city funds and the Urban Renewal Agency funds. The city funds make up $12.8 million in proposed funding, and there are 31.55 full-time equivalent positions within the results area. The strong and diverse economy section is on page 137, and then the Urban Renewal Agency is the entire book 2. Salem's Urban Renewal Agency is a distinct corporation with the mayor and city council serving as its board of directors and the city manager as executive director. City staff, primarily in the urban development department, support urban renewal programs through an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Salem. The 7 urban rural areas are featured on this slide from north to south. They are North Gateway, formed in 1990 and is the largest at 926 acres. Riverfront Downtown is the oldest area, formed in 1975. West Salem, formed in 2001. South Waterfront is the newest area, formed in 2007 and includes a portion of Minto Island. McGilchrist was formed in 2006. Fairview formed in 1984 and is no longer collecting tax increment. Mill Creek was formed in May 2005. Also included in the budget but not pictured this year is the proposed Jory Apartments URA. The Tax Allocation Bond Fund or Debt Service Fund as part of the URA, beginning on page 13 of the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Book 2, includes the tax increment revenues realized in each individual urban renewal area. The expenditure budget for this fund is $17 million. The Tax Allocation Improvement Fund or Capital Improvement Fund, beginning on page 23, also of Book 2, receives the proceeds realized from long-term or short-term borrowings in the Debt Service Fund, the fund we just talked about, to fund capital improvements. The total expenditure budget proposed for fiscal year 2021 is $57.6 million. Details about projects in each urban rural area are included in this section of the budget publication. Operational revenues and expenditures of the agency-owned Salem Convention Center are accounted for in the Convention Center Fund, beginning on page 59. Revenues are derived from food sales and meeting room and equipment rentals. The proposed fiscal year 21 budget expenditures total $7 million. As the Convention Center opened, the Urban Renewal Agency also established a gain-loss reserve to help augment an operating shortfall or fund repairs or capital improvements to the facility. A combination of transient occupancy tax funds and income from the Convention Center operations have been used to fulfill the $4 million goal for this reserve. As mentioned in the budget message, the city is aware and responding to concerns about economic and fiscal impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the community and the city finances. Some adjustments have been made and include a reduction in revenue expectation for both the Cultural Tourism Fund along with the Parking Fund. The Cultural and Tourism Fund expectation has been reduced by 10%, and then the Parking Fund has been reduced by 19%. Both of these funds rely on visitors coming to the city or downtown businesses for their revenues. City staff will continue to communicate, adjust, analyze, and inform the Budget Committee of further changes as a result of the pandemic. In addition to the proposed URA budget is the new Jory Apartments URA, the first URA since 2007. The Jory Apartments URA will fund the affordable housing development on the North Campus site of the former Oregon State Hospital. The Jory Apartments URA creation ordinance is planned for its second reading before the City Council on May 11th. Staff are now available for questions on the strong and diverse economy and the urban renewal area budgets.
Okay, we'll start with Member Hoy.
Thank you. Question for the city manager. Mr. City Manager, you sent out some information recently about shoring up the cultural site budgets. And I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of more explanation on that and help us understand that fully.
I'm sorry, if you could repeat the question. One of the speeding cars just went by my house and it's got loud.
I hate it when that happens. You might hear a snoring Labrador in the microphone too, just ignore that. Recently, you sent us some information about shoring up the cultural site budgets with some sort of creative.
Yes, thank you.
Can you explain that to us in a little bit more detail?
Yes, well, as we mentioned earlier, the budget officer and me, the transient occupancy tax is one of the city revenues that has taken an immediate and fairly significant hit. The offset to that hit was we were able to move a park project that was scheduled, budgeted to be partially funded by the transient occupancy tax over to parks system development charges. And that allows us to keep the grants that we provide to the cultural and historic organizations that are recipients of the a portion of the transient occupancy tax whole for at least Is it this fiscal year, Josh, or next fiscal year, or both?
It's both. So for this fiscal year, cash on hand is plenty to make sure the grants are stayed whole. For next year, with the 10% reduction, it required a decrease in expenditures to balance that budget. And that took the form of pushing out that $420,000 for parks improvements.
So
sorry, Member Hoy, please.
Thank you. So what are we not doing somewhere else to fund that?
Go ahead, Josh.
So there isn't any direct offset. So it'll be programmed for parks SDCs for the riverfront park. It's for the electrical improvements that correspond with the Rotary Amphitheater.
Thank you. And is there any consideration for offsetting of any other impacts from the TOT or of the TOT?
Great question. So at this point, it's very difficult to gauge what the impact will be going into next fiscal year. So we could reduce the budget by 50%, but we'd have to basically stop doing a lot of things with the top fund. So the way we're planning to accommodate that is basically with scenario planning. So if we're seeing a 40% reduction, 20% reduction, 10% reduction, those have different corresponding actions in the top fund and for the programs that they fund.
Thank you. Member Bennett.
Thank you. I wondered if the COVID-19 situation is going to cause or have any impact on the gain loss reserve at the convention center, or is that where assistance will occur on that project if there are funds needed?
I'll let Kristen answer that question.
Yes, so to date, we have not moved forward with the transfer from the convention center to the gain loss reserve for this fiscal year. And we're going to basically take a pass on that for this fiscal year and let them keep those funds on hand rather than have them make a deposit and then have to come back down the road and ask for funds. They're just going to keep those funds on hand, what would be their normal annual deposit to the gain loss reserve to cover operational needs. So we're not expecting that they will be coming forward with a request to take money from the gain loss reserve just because they're going to be keeping more on hand.
Okay. The other is we've got a couple of downtown sort of major cultural, I'm thinking particularly of the Elsinore, probably the Grand as well, that are facing some pretty serious financial impact. Are we talking with them about how to work with them as well? They're sort of outside of a lot of the other kinds of programs that are out there.
So my department has not had any direct communication with them. They don't, like you said, they don't fall into the categories of funds that we have available. TOT would be, one of the resources that may be available for an organization like that. So we have been working within the Urban Development Department and looking at all the resources we have available to bring forward some recommendations to City Council next month regarding the CDBG funds that are coming to the city to address the COVID pandemic and our other grants through the general fund. But none of those recommendations are going to be targeted to our cultural property.
One other, just finally, one of the projects that's being worked on this year is the Jerry Frank Amphitheater. One of the potential impacts is to the carousel. If for some reason the construction activity is forced to use the parking lot and essentially close the parking lot at the south end of the park, which pretty well serves the carousel and its customers. Do we have any plan for working with them, or do we have an alternative route that doesn't impact the carousel? It's one of those projects that I'm really concerned of our cultural livability type projects going to get lost in the shuffle in competition with another really important project.
Well, I believe we have Robert Chandler available, who's been our liaison on that project. He could perhaps answer the question, Mayor.
It's me in the back over here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
No.
So we're working as best we can with the carousel who might be impacted by the closure of the parking lot. We're trying to get permission for the railroad to use that access rather than have to close down the parking lot. If we have to close down the parking lot, we're going to try to keep it only for Monday through Thursday closed down. But I spoke with Marie just yesterday or the day before, just exploring different ways to offset her losses because they have a lot of booked events during the week that could be a problem. That's as far as we've got right now.
Okay, well, I hope we do figure this one out. I mean, that's an important resource. So is that whole south end of the park. It'll have impact on everything going on if that park down in that south end, including the bridge and the playground and the rest of it, if that parking lot shut down. So I wish you great luck with a railroad. That's always a delightful project. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, we'll go with member William Anderson.
I have a question about the projections on the convention center. Looking at like fees for service and rents, the fees for service, the projection is continuing at 4 million, but when I look at the actual, we never really get close to that. And in terms of rent, it's 2.176 million, but we never get anywhere close to 2 million. In all other revenues, it's 300,000, but the highest we've ever gotten is less than 7,000. So I'm just curious, what is the process for coming up with those projections?
Could you tell me, please, which page you're looking at?
Page 60. So in the top section, the resource type. So I'm looking at fees for service, and we're projecting 4 million, but when I look at the actual for 2018 and 2019, we've never come close to that. In terms of rents, we're projecting 2.176 million, but the highest we've ever gotten is 1.7 something million. In terms of other revenues, they're projecting 300,090, but the highest came in FY19, which was less than 7,000. So I'm just wondering, what is the basis for the projection that we're going to be making so much from the convention center this year, especially with COVID-19?
Just a moment. I'm going to check with Renee Frazier, who is my financial supervisor.
Thank you. And while you're doing that, just kind of a positive comment on the expenditure side is that it seems like each year they do come under budget, which is good.
Hello, this is Renee Frazier from the Urban Development Department. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good evening. So every year we receive a proposed budget from the convention center staff, and we actually take their projected budget and we increase it by about 25% only for the purpose of budget authority. And the reason is if they have an excellent, amazing year, they take in more revenue and then they actually have to expend more money. And in order to comply with Oregon budget law, we would have to do a supplemental budget, which has happened in several years, very late in the year when they start realizing that increased business in May and June when they get really busy. So we've gotten into the habit the last couple of years of just taking what they propose and increasing our budget authority just to account for anything that happens like that, so we don't have to come back for a supplemental.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
You're welcome.
How about Member Tom Anderson?
Thank you. This one is for Director Rutherford, but it's on the page 146 of the strong and diverse economy as opposed to the urban renewal.
Okay.
And it's a question, and then I'll have a comment. And the question is, I'm looking at parking meters, and they've gone up from 326,000 last year to 611,000 this year. We're buying new parking meters, and where are we buying them?
So looking at the increased cost for purchasing.
Is it the smart meters or the smarter meters or the less dumb meters?
I think this is a result of some of the same program things that you've seen in the police and fire department, just being consolidated and moved around.
Okay.
So if you notice the 139 under the capital improvement transfer, that's a transfer to actually the reserve. I believe that's included in the parking meter total there.
Okay.
As well as probably something else. But again, I can do that program mapping for this one as well if you'd like.
Terrific. And then here's my comment, and I have to say I've read what the Downtown Advisory Board wrote, and it's about parking, and it's about parking meters, and it's about parking meters downtown. And I know that's not really an issue for the Budget Committee, but I think it may be something that the council might want to revisit again, because we've got the members of the Downtown Advisory Board where this might affect saying, in effect, we've got so much traffic downtown that we need to have some way to encourage a better circulation. And it's well known that charging for parking is a way to increase circulation and actually get more people down in the downtown area. So that's just a comment for some later time for the council.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member McCoy.
Before Josh had commented, that these are not funds that are budgeted for purchases of new meters at this time. We're not procuring meters right now for downtown.
Thank you for that clarification. Member McCoy.
Back to the conference center, how are they doing? I know with the screaming hall I've seen, and that's, you're keying back to the industry I represented for years. They're getting mass cancellations of conventions, meetings. Everything's closing. Air traffic's down 5% of what it was before the COVID happened. So how has that affected their bookings for May and June, which somebody said are their busier months?
Yeah, no, it's not good. They've laid off most of the staff there until we reopen and they can start booking again and trying to figure out what that's going to look like for them in terms of how many people they can have in a space at any given time. But it's hit them hard. And so that is why they're keeping the cash on hand rather than making the deposit to the gain loss reserve. So,
along with that, I would just say, if you think it's going to only be a 10% reduction in the tot tax, I think you're absolutely, that's just, you're just way off, way off. You're not going to have any business for the next 4 or 5 months, I would think. You've had everything canceled. Nobody's traveling. The hotels are empty and the restaurants are closed. So I don't know how you think you're going to bring any top money in that's going to only be 10% off in the next year. You got to bite the bullet early and not late, because you're going to be behind the curve if you wait to start adjusting things down the road and you have people making plans based on what they think they're going to get from the tot income or lack of it. That industry is a wreck right now, and it's not going to get better quick.
Okay, thank you, Member McCoy. Other questions for staff on this result area? Member Sund.
Yeah, on that, thank you, Chair. On the Downtown Advisory Board's memo that they sent regarding the parking fund recommendations. So as I look at it, it looks like they were recommending $25,000 in contractual services for downtown promotion. Is that, would that would fall onto the downtown promotion line that's currently budgeted at $3,500 on page 148?
Yes, and those are funds that have in the last few years been provided as a grant to the Salem, to the Main Street Association.
Has there, thank you, has there been consideration to holding back some funds for when things do start to open up in order to really promote the sort of rapid refill of economic activity that funds things like the TOT and other, just to get more people here. I mean, people are going to be, I think, just itching to come to Salem, right? Everybody wants to go on a trip after this is over. So is there a consideration to that with these funds, or is that maybe somewhere else?
We are looking at funds to support small businesses directly. But in terms of the marketing and promotion, that some of that's falling under Travel Salem. That's a strategy that they're employing, and that's TOT funded. In terms of the parking fund for marketing and promotion, those activities have really been focused more locally rather than more broadly to bring people in from outside of Salem to Salem. It's been more about promoting Salem businesses to Salem residents.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, after that uncomfortable pause, I will move us along to ask Budget Officer Josh Eggleston to move us along to our next service area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcoming Livable Community, which is the final results area for review this evening, will be on page 155 of the budget publication. The Welcoming Livable result area total budget is $30.5 million, and there are 133 full-time equivalent positions within this result area's programs. Program pages for the results area provide further breakdown of services and positions. For workforce changes, the Community Development Department is proposing 3 new positions that are offset with increased planning fees. In this case, if the planned increases do not generate the anticipated revenues, the positions will not be filled. Among the highlights for the Welcome Livable Community results area are site work at the Riverfront Jerry Frank Salem Rotary Amphitheater site, which is displayed above. Master plan updates and developments to Gear Community Park, Secor Park, and Bush Park. The voter-approved Salem Public Library retrofit is also underway, with work having begun in the early spring of 2020. The main library is anticipated to reopen in the summer of 2021 and will make the building both safer in an earthquake and improve accessibility in and outside the building. 2 social service funded programs, the Homeless Rental Assistance Program, or HRAP, and the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, have both received increased funding for the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget. HRAP has an increase of $400,000 for total program funding of $1.1 million in fiscal year 2021. The program will aid an additional 75 chronically homeless individuals in Salem and will continue to provide up to 12 months of rental assistance, utilities, basic personal care items, and medical services. This service is supported by the general fund. Meanwhile, in early April 2020, the city learned it would be a recipient of over $775,000 in federal funds for the CDBG program as a result of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act. The additional program funding will go toward the mission of the CDBG programs. This concludes my presentation. Staff are available for questions on the Welcoming Livable Community result area.
We will start with Member Hoy.
Thank you. I have a question and a comment. One, the comment I want to thank the city manager for including the restoration of the HRAP funds. I think that is the most critical thing that we can do in this budget. And I very much appreciate the fact that they are in his proposed budget. The question I have is for Director Wright, if he's with us, regarding, I'm assuming this is his position, the sign, I think it's a sign inspector. I'm intrigued and would like to know what the intent of that position is.
Yeah, hi. Can everyone hear me okay? I just want to make sure. Norman Wright, Community Development Director.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. So the sign inspector position is part of a longstanding conversation that we've had as a staff as well as the council to find a better way for us to administer our sign code. For a couple of years now, we've had intermittent sweeps to try to enforce on illegally placed temporary signs. We've also had some intermittent ability to try to review signs coherently, cohesively, and work with people to have a better awareness of what our sign code is for permanent signs, temporary signs, issue permits. What we continue to see over the past couple of years, though, is that there are many people who do come in and seek their sign permits. There are many people who do follow our rules regularly, but there are many other people as well who just don't have the awareness and don't have the access apparently to our permitting process to be able to come in and bring their signs into order with us as well, whether it be temporary or again permanent signs that we have to try to review, permit, inspect, and then monitor over time. So this is a much needed position for us to just bring consistency again to the enforcement and the administration of our sign ordinance for the city as a whole.
Member Hoy.
Thank you. Just to follow up and to confirm that this would not be paid from general fund dollars, this would be through permit fees?
That is correct. We've been monitoring the activity for the last couple of years, and there is enough activity there and enough demand just for what we permit right now to support this as a full-time employee.
Thank you, Director Wright.
To clarify, it is a general fund position and it is general fund revenue, but it has a revenue offset. It's a new fee being paid into the general fund with new expenses.
Thank you.
Member Bennett.
Thank you. Norman, I wondered, one of the pieces of public testimony we received were from the Chamber Home Builders and Realtors asking about this fee and making some suggestions. One of the things they asked was that if the fee increase it's sort of tying the revenue source to the service, that the fee increase actually go for the 3 positions you're asking for. And if they don't go for that, I think they're probably the other half of that would be, please don't charge us the fee. I think the concern was that this might become just another general fund revenue resource. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I certainly do, Mayor. Thank you. I certainly understand their concerns. And as Josh mentioned in the opening narrative, if we do not see the activity that is necessary to generate the revenue to support all 3 positions, that we will not hire all 3 positions. Similarly, if we do see some amount of the revenue that's there, but again, not enough, we'll still invest that to the fullest extent that we can, recognizing this is a general fund source. We'll still invest as best as we can to be as efficient as possible with what we do have. This is a fee for a service, and so we do intend, and thanks to the city manager as well as to our work with the budget office, we do intend to dedicate all the revenue to that service as best as we can, even within the flexibility or the limitations of the general fund. So I completely understand where they're coming from. This is in response to the activity we continue to see, though, and so I do think that they will see the investment of their permit fees go to more resources for the service.
Yeah, and my impression is that's their concern. And do you have a priority among the 3? I mean, is it planner first, sign code second, and inspections third, or how do you see that?
Yeah, so the priority starts with the planning manager. Right now, our planning administrator, Lisa Anderson Ogilvie, has if I remember correctly, it's 14 direct reports. And for someone in that kind of position with that type of complexity to the work, that is significantly more direct reports than she can sustain with the activity that we see, the development requests, the permit applications that's still coming in. And so that is the first one, for the sake of being able to coordinate better with our staff, make some efficiency improvements where necessary, and better communicate with all of our applicants on all of our cases, since she is currently the only person to try to help resolve any issues that might come up between an applicant and a planner. Number two, and it's really a close second place, is that sign inspector, because the present need that has existed again for the past 2 years that we've been monitoring. And so that is definitely our very close second priority item. And then our third priority position is that zoning inspector position. It is a quality control position. And we do think it's necessary if the activity and the revenues permit it, but it is definitely our third priority.
Thank you, Director Wright. Member Lewis.
Thanks. Norm, I'm just curious, the line item for the planning supervisor, I would think in a department the size of yours that you would have the opportunity to promote from within and hire at a lower level. And I'm curious why that's not the case. And more specifically, do you feel as though your department is short in some type of expertise that you need to find somebody with a higher level of whatever experience you're looking for?
Yeah, so if this position is authorized, and if we do move forward with any kind of recruitment, I do anticipate that it will be external, namely because we do have great staff right now, but I do want to give a full and total recruitment and see what is available to us in terms of expertise in the broader region, certainly. That's just as a matter of principle. That's not to say anything towards the talent and potential of our own staff, because you're right, we have outstanding staff as it is. As far as the pricing of the position, as it is currently listed as a manager 2, step 6, this is part of our effort to try to gauge what we think is going to be the cost of that position over the long term, so that we can calculate our fees for the best sustainable cost recovery that we can find. So if we estimated this at the lowest possible level, I don't think that'd be a good estimate for our sake in trying to design our fees at the right amount, because we want to assume that this will be a position that will again be funded by these fees for a long period, likely to be brought in something above, say, manager 2, step 1, perhaps not manager 2, step 6, but somewhere in between. And so we're trying to find a delta there where we can get the best possible estimation. So it's a conservative means of trying to calculate the cost, while not necessarily banking on the assumption that we would hire somebody at that particular rate for their first day.
Thank you, Director Wright. Member Chirac. Oh, I'm sorry. Member Lewis, did you have a follow-up?
Yes. It's actually on a different subject, but I think one of the things that has brought some concern to the Home Builders Chamber and realtors is the implementation of these fees at maybe the worst time that you could think of doing that. Is there any anticipation or any thought about holding off on the fees until our future looks a little bit clearer?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Lewis. For what it's worth, the governor's Stay Home, Save Lives order is not affecting the construction industry in any way that we can tell, because for at least the past 4 weeks, we have seen cases, applications stream into the office above our average rate for the past, say, 5 months that we've been tracking our data. So to me, this is good news, a silver lining amidst all the difficulties that I know are unfolding. But for us and for also our building and safety division, permitting activity and development activity has remained very strong. We did see a dip below average applications for the month of March. But really, when I look at, again, the line graph for the past 5 months, to say nothing of the past 2 years of history that we've been tracking, we've been at a level of activity that has really necessitated these new positions so that we can keep up with the workload. That workload has not diminished, again, as of May 2nd, this being May 6th, May 2nd being our most recent measure.
Thank you. Member Chirac. Check your microphone for your mute.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I was glad to see the additional person for the sign code enforcement because since the last woman, I can't remember her name, retired several years ago, I mean, our signs have gone basically unenforced, the sign code. And I've served on my neighborhood association board for many years, and that is one of the highest areas of complaints we get at meetings, people about illegal signs, particularly in the public right of way. So, boy, we really need to clean up our arterials, Commercial, Liberty. I mean, they're just littered with all these illegal signs. So I look forward to seeing a lot of good work in that area.
Member Sund.
Thank you, Chair. What mechanism is there to, as we get through the fiscal year, if the application volume does and the permit volume does kind of start to come down and the revenue's not there, is there a point in which you would pull the trigger on these positions and then if it subsequently were to decrease, I mean, how because I think it speaks to some of the concerns, but how does that work sort of operationally?
Yeah, so we take a very data-driven approach as best we can. And one of the operative measures that we've tried to communicate in presenting this to the Realtors Association, the home builders, et cetera, is that we try to think about case volume in terms of cases per planner. We would prefer, for the sake of good quality of the work, to see no more than 225 cases per planner per year. Right now, we are averaging roughly 290 plus cases per planner per year. So to your question about when would we have some sort of signal that we either need or don't need the positions, that's one of our primary measures that we're trying to use to try to gauge, again, what the workload is and how many people we need to meet it. We are significantly above what we would see as our ideal. But if and when we start to see cases diminish to a point where we're getting close to that 225 cases per planner, then I think we start to think about what we need to do to right size our workload or our workforce, or certainly if we continue to be at this rate that we're at today, then that definitely tells us we need these positions. Even so, even with the volume that we continue to get that's above what we see as our average for this past month, we're going to be slow in hiring positions because some of this revenue won't be realized until many more months into the year. And we're trying to operate on this cost recovery, almost more of a kind of a business-like way of doing things with development review. So the mayor asked earlier about our priorities. We do see a need, as mentioned by many others already, for the sign inspector to be hired as soon as we can with the new budget and the authorization to do so. We also see the real need for all of the team, as well as for our customers, to hire the planning manager. Even still, if we are authorized to hire that third position, which is the zoning inspector, we will hold off on that as much as we can, just really make sure that we've exhausted every possible efficiency that we can, make sure that the workload is still there, say in June or July. We're going to hold on to that one and practice a little more hesitancy and just really make sure we're on solid ground before we move forward with it.
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow up really quick.
Sure.
So by approving, if we were to approve the budget as is, we would be approving those positions as well as the increase in the fees.
That is correct. And our main concern is the 100% cost recovery, because it gives us flexibility in staffing, and you would be authorizing and approving the positions. But again, we're not treating it as a foregone conclusion that we'll fill all three.
Thank you.
And just real quick on that point, if I may, what you're recommending to the city council is the budget. The actual fee increases will come to the city council directly in the master fee schedule in June.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, any last questions on this, our final service area for the evening? Don't worry, we got deliberations still to go. Okay, seeing only smiles. Oh, Kara, oh, I'm sorry, you were off my screen. I was like, she quit. You left.
Alice right there in the middle.
I'm so sorry. Councilor Member Kaiser.
Thank
please.
you. Just quickly, he may have already left. Norm, right? It might be helpful perhaps to explain cost recovery to make sure that everyone knows what you're talking about when you talk about these positions. This is the intent of a fee increase and adding positions is not to make money. It's not to push it into the general fund to pay for other things. That's not the intent of this. This is to essentially get to zero as far as your expense versus your revenue. But that concept, could you just explain like why that makes good business sense to get there as a city?
Certainly. I think you've done a great job yourself, though, Councilor Kaiser, in explaining it for us. But yes, in terms of the business sense of it, we see something really fantastic that we get to enjoy with an enterprise fund for building and safety. Building and safety operates under a very strict standard, which they can only invest their funds and their permit revenue into the positions. And I think for our customers, it gives them a sense that every time that they pay for the service, they are getting the full service in return. For many, many years, at least as far as I understand the entire history of the city's work in planning and development review on that side, our general fund has effectively covered at least half of that expense. And the idea of cost recovery, at least as a 100% rate, is for us to be able to make sure that we can have the fee cover the cost of the service as it can best be delivered, and then that fee support it so that we don't have to rely so much on a general fund that has so many other needs to be met, and more importantly, so that we can use that same revenue under that same rationale to provide the resources, the staff, the time and attention that an applicant needs. When I said earlier that we really are monitoring this case per planner ratio, what it means is that the way we currently operate, we can only afford the planners that we have under our current fee structure, and that leads to planners having 290 cases a year instead of the 225 that we would like for them to be at. With this cost recovery at the rate that we are setting, we can get their caseload down and then be able to provide them more ability to work with, whether it be customers, the community, all of our stakeholders who are a part of all of these land use cases, building permits, dwelling permits, and many, many other requests and needs that we see across the PAC counter. So cost recovery is very much about nothing more than the 100% in this case of what we want to try to set our service at in terms of the costs. So 100%, nothing more, and for us to invest fully at every point so that we can grow as the activity grows and we can improve the service as a result.
Thank you, Directorate. Yeah. Okay. Budget Officer Eggleston, do you have anything further for the results area reviews?
No, not at this time.
Okay, the final item under special orders of business this evening is an opportunity for the committee to continue any earlier discussion or introduce an issue or concern for the committee's consideration. This is now the wide open portion of our discussion. I will make a note that if we want to go past 10 o'clock this evening, we will need successive motions at half an hour increments in order to continue our deliberations. I also want to thank, we are all on screen. I would really like to thank those off screen, which is the city staff who've been attentively listening and hanging in for the 4 hours. So here to them. I feel like as the chair, it might help us to get a very 1 minute overview of what our next meeting might entail. We have done a tremendous amount of work this evening, but if we get a little bit of a description of what our next meeting is going to entail from the budget officer, it might help us understand the value of continued deliberations this evening, as opposed to a week from tonight. So, Mr. Eggleston, can you just give us a snapshot of what we're looking at next Wednesday?
Sure. So compared to tonight, next Wednesday is very light as far as actual presentations. You will have to review and approve the property tax levy. Other than that, the meeting is set aside to review information that we'll gather for you from tonight, public testimony, continuing the CIP and recommending that, and then deliberating and hopefully recommending a budget.
Okay, thank you. So with that in mind, the value of the remainder of the conversation this evening is that we can come up with questions to deliver to the staff in order to have information for our next meeting. But we're not going to get to the point, I don't think, this evening of making significant changes to the recommended budget that's been presented to us. I think if anyone wants to entertain those sorts of motions, I'd recommend that we talk about them more fully next Wednesday instead of this evening. So with that precursor to the remaining deliberations for the evening, I'll open up the floor for comment or question or points of clarification for the city staff. Member Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only comment is it's been a long evening. We've digested a lot of information, and I think we should call it a night and come back next Wednesday ready to talk in detail and debate anything that we have to debate.
Okay, if I was putting out lines, you were reading between them. A member's son, did you have anything to add?
Well, I don't feel like I should now, but thank you, Chair. And the only thing for next week would be it'd be helpful to Member McCoyd's comment about the TOT funds, just some stress. Like, I know this is difficult. I mean, we are in the midst of a very difficult forecasting process at the hospital right now, but it would be nice to know, I guess, if the TOT funds came in, 50%, some stress test. What would the budget look like for us to understand the difference there and just what that might do going into the year?
We can provide at least a preliminary sample of our scenario planning, certainly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, that's all. I'm done now. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Sun. Budget Officer Eggleston, can you give us a recommendation as people digest what they've heard tonight? If they have questions over the next couple days, do they need to email you directly, email the entire group to see the questions that are being presented to the city staff? What's the best process to keep the conversation rolling? I mean, not conversation, I know we're not supposed to deliberate, but give questions and points of clarification to the city staff before Wednesday.
Great question. I'd recommend you email me directly, and I can direct it to the appropriate department, the right person to answer the question. We try to avoid all of you emailing each other just for public meeting law.
And our practice has been, unless it's a very routine question, our practice has been to share the question and the response with all of you, with each of you. So you all have that information, not necessarily the the member who's asking the question, but certainly the question itself and the response.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, I'll extend my thanks to all the budget committee members, all the members of city staff, quite the marathon, and in this, the most strangest of forms. So if there's no other meeting for the budget committee this evening, seeing none, thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Great job, Paul.
Good night. Great job, Paul.
Great job,
Thanks,
Paul.
everybody.
Good job.
Thank you all. Nice seeing y'all.
Good seeing you.